too. Thanks for doing this.
Oh yeah, thanks for being here. Okay, I'm gonna make you host, Chris. You can hopefully play music.
Okay, cool. Okay, sweet. Okay, great. So as we wait for more people to come in, we'll do a little grounding meditation. Let's see, I'm gonna play some music through. Oops. And just let me know if the levels are okay once that starts playing. Hello everyone and welcome. So we'll have an official opening and an official welcome soon, but since we're all gathered here right now, let's just close our eyes. Find yourself in a nice comfortable seated position, and we'll close our eyes, bring your attention upward and inward, looking up between your brow point. Begin by taking nice deep breaths in and out, expanding open your rib cage and your lungs, filling up all the way down into your stomach, and then exhaling out completely. Just take a few of these nice deep breaths all together. And bringing your focus, your awareness down to your feet, your legs, and your sit bones, and dropping down an anchor point, dropping some roots down into the earth and going as deep as you want until you feel grounded, supported, pulling all parts and aspects of you that may be in other places, pulling them all back into this moment and feeling yourself present, that you have arrived, that you are here. Mentally vibrating, I am here. I am fully present. Feeling that nice grounded connection with yourself, with the earth. Feeling your spine nice and straight like a tree trunk. And we're going to inhale as we lift our shoulders up towards our ears. And exhale as we round the back. Opening up our heart, releasing any tension. Giving ourselves a few seconds here just to feel fully settled, grounded, arriving. Welcoming all aspects and parts of yourself to the conversations that we're going to have today. Setting an intention for yourself of how you'd like to arrive. Setting intentions for what you'd like to get out of this. For what you'd like to speak into this safe container, this safe space that we're creating to really go deep. And once you have those intentions, bring them into your heart center. We're going to use our prana, our breath, our life force to take a nice deep inhale and ignite this intention in our heart, and then exhale out. So anchoring into it, nice deep inhale. And exhale out. Beautiful. Thank you, ladies. You can slowly open your eyes back into this space. I'll turn the music down. Oh, you're muted, B.
Awesome, thank you, Chris. And thank you all for being here. We still have several people that registered that aren't here yet, so maybe they'll be trickling in, and it's 1:08 my time, so we'll go ahead and get started. So first, before we get into it, we would love to hear, well, actually, before we get into it, let's actually go over the objectives for today. So what we would love to accomplish by the end of this workshop today. So our objectives are to clarify important racial justice concepts, to identify each of our blind spots, to discover what we don't know that we don't know about racism, to identify ways of being that don't work to further the end goal of ending racism, to identify new ways of being and actions that will be more effective, to have an open and honest dialogue where we reveal and not conceal, and to leave feeling like a Jedi, which stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. So those are our objectives for today. Does that sound good? Does that sound like what y'all came for? Okay, awesome. And then we'll go over agreements as well. So the agreements for this workshop for today are that we all stay engaged throughout, that we are willing to look for what's been invisible to us previously, that we're willing to experience discomfort in this conversation, that we each seek to identify where we have been being ineffective, where we identify the sea of judgments that we've been looking through when we're engaged in dialogue about racism, that we're willing to call ourselves out, that we ask questions even if we think they're embarrassing or dumb, that we do not take up space trying to establish our anti-racist credentials, that we speak our truth, and that we expect and accept non-closure, so that none of us expect that we'll be walking away from this workshop with everything tied up in a neat, nice bow, and we understand that we'll probably leave with more questions than we came with. So those are the agreements for this conversation today. Can I just see a show of hands if everybody agrees to those agreements? Awesome, beautiful. So now what we'd love to do is hear from each of you about how it's been for you, how it's been over the past few weeks with all of the events that have been taking place and just what's been coming up in your awareness. What sort of emotions, what confusion, if any, has been arising? What's been your experience over these past few weeks? So, and I can go first. I can start us off. So, I've been going through so many waves of different emotions. I've gone through feelings of sadness at everything that's happening, feelings of anger at people's responses to what's happening, frustration with the ignorance that I'm perceiving and the lack of concern on certain people's behalf. I've been going through feelings of powerlessness, of what can I do to better serve, feelings of confusion about how I can support rather than be counterproductive, and then feelings of shame for not having shown up more in this space previously, and feelings of insecurity for not knowing the right things to say sometimes, feeling uninformed. And yeah, so all of it. It's all been arising for me. It's just the whole spectrum of emotions. So I'm curious to hear from the rest of you what's been coming up for you over these past few weeks. And anybody who wants to share can just go ahead and unmute yourself.
Happy to share. Next. Everyone can hear me, right? Okay, perfect. So I'm Serena, Brandy's sister. I think over the past few weeks, I've felt so many of those exact same things that you said, Brandy, but mostly for me, confusion and anger, and just realizing how many people in my own sphere share different views about all of this than me, and not that I'm right, but just showing kind of a lack of care or even wanting to try to understand or fix things. And these are like family members, and feeling shame around that, and also how do I approach these people, just a lot of confusion, and then shame from myself that, like Brandy said, this hasn't been a bigger issue for me all along, you know, just wow. And also some joy, because I feel like, wow, finally this is becoming a much bigger conversation and people really are listening, and there is a lot more clarity and resources about what I can do as a white person to really try to make a difference and have that discomfort arise in me and not run away from it and just really like learn from it. And also just to be letting you guys know, FW is my husband. He's actually in a college class right now, but he's trying to listen to this conversation, but he'll probably not be actively participating, just so you guys know. All right, thanks.
Hi.
I'll go next.
Oh, sorry. Go next, please, Melissa.
Sorry. Okay. All right. So I'm Melissa. I'm friends with Serena, Mara, and Brandy. And I guess lately, yeah, feelings of anger, shame, feeling uninformed, definitely can identify that with that. The white savior complex has definitely been coming up for me a lot, especially when I post things like on social media and I'm like I'm not even a person of color. And I don't know, it's just, I feel like I'm trying to help minorities, but I'm white, so I'm not really like psychologically compatible. It just kind of throws me off a little bit sometimes. Dealing with my own prejudice. For example, like I used to teach at a Black school in an inner city, and I chose to leave that to a white suburban school. And that felt very comfortable for me. And I'm like, well, why did that feel so comfortable for me to leave that? So I've been kind of mulling that in my head a lot. Also discovering how racist your family is. It seems like everything's out on the table now, and having trouble communicating with your family and finding common ground. That's been really frustrating for me. So that's what's been going on with me.
I'll go next. My name is Shannon, and I found out about this through Nikki Benoit. She passed along Brandy's email, and I was excited to recognize Brandy's name from back in the day doing standing up for animals together. Yeah, a lot of things, a lot of emotion, a lot of sadness, wanting everybody to feel loved and feel like they belong. And well, yeah, sadness about that. And I've had sadness about that for a long time, but I recognize that it kind of comes and goes. Like it comes more into the foreground when things come up that are in the news, and then it goes more into the background as other things come up in my life. So it's not like a constant issue that I'm thinking about, but definitely, yeah, a lot of racism in my family, and I don't know what to do about it. I've had lots of fights with my father about that certain things are unacceptable to say or to do, and he disagrees, and I can't change him at all. So it's like, I feel kind of helpless and powerless, because here's someone that I love and he doesn't understand at all. So I kind of feel like, well, I mean, what hope do I have with other people, like trying to make a difference? So sometimes I feel despair. But also my parents are in their 70s, so I think, well, it's partly a generational thing. It's partly older people are more resistant to change, but I know there's still, it's not just that. But also I relate a lot to what Melissa said about the white savior thing. It's like, yeah, I want to help. I want to do what I can, but in an effort to try to be of help, I went to, I teach at Pasadena City College. I went to a Zoom call that was hosted by Pasadena City College. And there was a lot of anger in the session, justifiably, But several of the people chose to turn that anger at the white participants on the Zoom call. So they were calling, me and others out directly. And that left me so confused because I felt like I want to help, but I don't know what I can do. Anger is justifiable, but I hope that there's a difference between me and my father. And right, like I want to post on social media, but when I do, I'm kind of like, is this in good taste? Like I struggle with the wording to try to be in solidarity and of support, but I always worry about invoking anger because I'm really conflict avoidant anyway, and like afraid of people getting mad at me. So yeah, a lot of confusion around the issue, how to be of help, how to be an ally without feeling like I'm overstepping, like I'm presuming, like I'm trying to claim, be a white savior, or trying to claim like I know how to do this, or so but I was really excited to see this session, this opportunity, and also impressed with how long it is. I was like, wow. I mean, if I find any resources, because the couple people that I have asked, they've been like, white people, I don't know what you guys can do, honestly. So I'm glad to see this opportunity, and it seems like a lot of resources are going to come out of this. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Shannon. There's so much that we can do, and that's our intention for today, to really clarify what we can do. I have a friend who's a Black woman who kind of helped create this workshop today, and I was bouncing ideas off of her, like what's going to be effective and what's helpful. And the way that she described it, I thought was so perfect. She was like, I think for white people right now, it kind of feels like a game of like double dutch, when there's like the two ropes going at the same time, and like y'all are wanting to jump in, but you're like, oh, like how do I get in there? And she's like, and you just have to kind of reckon with the fact that you're going to get smacked in the face by the rope when you try to jump in, and that's going to happen several times, and that's just part of it. That's a part of the process of jumping into this double dutch rope. Yeah, but she was like, but I get it. It's confusing because right now simultaneously we're being told like, shut up and let melanated voices talk, and simultaneously don't be silent because silence is violence. So there's lots of these paradoxes where today one of our intentions is for everybody to really get clear about what's the middle ground and what's the nuance, because there's so much nuance to this, and I get that many of us are afraid to ask questions. So this is intended to be a safe space where we can ask questions about that nuance and really clarify for ourselves where we can show up and actually be effective and be of service. Yeah. Hi, Nikki. Great to see you. Thanks for joining. So glad you're here. Awesome. Okay, and then, given that we have so much that we want to cover today, we'll just try to keep the shares to like 2 or 3 minutes moving forward. So whoever's ready to share next, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no, that's okay. We didn't set that context ahead of time, so nothing to apologize for. Thank you.
So my name is Burnett, and I've been working with Brandy for a few months now, and that's how I heard about this call. And I guess as far as feelings that I've been having lately, I'm a person of color, and I think that this time has been very empowering. I love to see that these conversations are finally being had because it's something I've had to deal with my whole life. And I'm also saddened at the people who are close in my life who are so completely against this movement, even though I'm their friend and I'm someone important in their life. And just to kind of see how they can like tokenize me or just kind of see me as the exception rather than the rule is really disappointing. But I also have seen a lot of people show up, which I have loved and appreciated. And as far as feeling like you can speak as a white person, I think that it's really important that you do. I think that when other white people hear white people speak about the issue, they might open their mind up a little bit more to it. So yeah, that's my take, and I'm excited to be here and hear more.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for being here.
I can go next. My name is Mara, and I'm Brandy and Serena's sister. I'll also say that I work for a nonprofit where we advocate for abused and neglected children. And as we all know, it's incredibly disproportionate in terms of the advocates that we have and that who represent the children that we serve when it comes to race and ethnicity. And these issues have always been so prevalent in the work that I do, but right now I think it's just so incredibly important for me as a human being, but also for me in my profession to be involved in this movement, aware, knowledgeable, and just actively doing something. But I so identify with everything that's been said so far from everybody about the anger and the confusion and the frustration and the lack of knowing how to appropriately jump into that double Dutch jumping rope that's happening. And I'm trying to deal with that right now. And the only thing that I wanted to add was just the anger and hurt and just raw emotion that I felt from George Floyd's video. And I want to hold on to that raw emotion when it comes to the general issues when we're just talking about them, because I think that's what's happened in the past. We've lost sight of the raw emotion when talking about these issues, and right now we're feeling all of that anger, and we need to hold on to that to help make change. And that's what's been on my mind lately, surrounding all of this. Thanks for letting me be here, and I just want to say I've got a baby on me, so I might be muting and putting my camera off often.
I love seeing Braden's little hand, just like, it's so cute. Yeah, and please jump in with your perspective, Mara. I mean, you know so much about these issues because your line of work. So also, everyone, just so you know, if you click participants at the bottom of the screen, you can, wait, no, what do you do? How do you raise your hand? I forget now. I'm host, so I don't know if I can raise my hand. Do you guys see how to raise your hand? I think you click participants. Do you all see? So if ever somebody's talking and you have something you really want to say, so everybody practice raising your hand. Yeah, awesome. Okay, beautiful. Yeah, so we all get that. So just do that, and I'll be aware of the chat box at all times. So we'd love to hear from you. Cool. All right, Nikki, we'd love to hear from you.
Hi, everybody. What a treat. Brandy, you are a gem on earth. From the day I met you at Occidental College, however many years ago that was, I'm just so touched at how much of a loving light influence you are in the world. So excited that you're doing this, so thank you. My apologies for being late. I just learned about this and I have like a gajillion things to do before my 7 o'clock event. So I'm like rushing around. But I'm so in love with this topic of fine-tuning our greatest, most empowered ways to show up. We're like the men in the Me Too movement, right? The conscious men, the ones who identify that there is a clusterfuck of ills that have just been so normalized that it's off most people's radar, but finally, like a breath of fresh air, something's gonna be done. And I know this is a horribly painful time, but I have never been more enthusiastic and more optimistic about finally doing something. You know, it's just like walking around kind of in the twilight zone. I've been an advocate, you know, a conscious participant of humanity, I believe, for like about 20 years. It's really painful to see all this normalized oppression and torture of animals and humans in the earth and not have anyone around you even blink an eye. So I'm feeling really open and excited about how I can transform into being the best version of an earthling that I can be in this way. And And it may mean completely dismantling everything I've ever known, and that's fine. I'm ready. Just take it all, whatever, however I can show up in the juiciest version of my abilities to support these beautiful beings that, you know, and then you see the Black Lives Matter, and yes, of course, but I want it, someone else posted a meme that says, Black lives don't just matter. They're beautiful, they're articulate, they're sexy, they're fun, they're healers, they're magnificent. Like, they don't just matter. Oh my God, there's so much more than mattering, you know? So I like that we're looking at the complete dismantling of all oppressive systems, but specifically any ways that we have been interpreting reality, like the fact that Band-Aids are beige. It totally didn't even hit me until like a couple years ago. I was like, oh, Band-Aids are beige. What the hell is that? You know? So I'm excited for my own transformation, and I'm so excited to live in a world birthed from the end of all of this and the birth of so much love-based, innovative, inclusive ways to human. So thank you.
Yeah, awesome, Nikki. Yeah, it's amazing how when we're looking for it, we see how omnipresent it is. It's so everywhere. Like yesterday, we were making dinner and I looked at a package of food that I have, and on the back, you know, it's often like the face of the creator of that food. And then I was like, of course, it's a white person. And I was like, huh, interesting. Let me look. So I literally looked through all of the food that I have in my pantry, and every single box of food that I have in my pantry has a white person's face on it. Like, if there's anyone's face, it's a white person's face. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Or just thinking about that, we call, like Jane Elliott talks about how we call the president's residence the White House. Why do we call it the White House? Like, that's absurd. That has to change. It's just ridiculous. Yeah. And everything down to Band-Aids. So unfortunate. Yeah.
I do also, real quick, I apologize. I'm hosting an event and doing a shit ton of things. My camera's going to be off and I'm going to probably have to leave early, but I'm soaking it all up and I hope this is going to be recorded.
It is being recorded. And we also have a Google Doc of notes that I'm actually going to share with all of you right now. So let's see. I'm going to put it in the chat box. And in this Google Doc, it has our agreements for today and our objectives. And then I spelled important wrong. That's nice. The important terms that we're defining, and then what we can do better. All the bullet points of that. So that's all there. If you're a visual person and you'd prefer to kind of follow along on there, that's what that's there for. Also, if you open up that Google Doc, one of the first things that you'll see in there is a little chart. And this is the discomfort scale. It's called the feel-good scale, actually, but for today's purposes, we're going to be calling it the discomfort scale. And as you can see along the left-hand side, there's numbers 1 through 10. And it goes red zone, yellow zone, green zone. And red zone is essentially when we're in our stress response, when we're in reactive mode, when we're in our fight or flight, when we're triggered. Oh, is it locked? Okay, thank you. So I just invite all of us to be aware of where we go on this discomfort scale throughout the conversation. So just checking in with yourself on a scale of 1 to 10. How uncomfortable am I in this moment? Am I in red zone? Am I in green zone? And just track and just notice, is there a topic that we're talking about that takes me into red zone? Is there a concept that takes me into red zone? Am I staying in green zone? And not to judge yourself, just to be aware. One of our goals for today is to really focus on expanding our nervous system so that we're more able to have these difficult conversations and ongoingly show up in these challenging spaces without getting burnt out. Because one of the most ineffective things that we can do is allow ourselves to get burnt out and then not want to ever go back to a protest, not want to ever have a challenging conversation again. So that's why throughout our work today, we're going to be integrating meditation and breath work into this conversation so that we can learn to do that in our daily lives as well, and really draw upon the power of breath and mindfulness to source ourselves so that we're more sustainable and we're able to be in this work for the long haul. So that being said, I'm actually going to turn it over to Chris to lead us through a quick breath work before we get into the nitty gritty of this. And meanwhile, I'm going to try to change the permissions on this Google Doc.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris, and I'm here today as the co-host with Brandy to do some embodiment work around everything that we're feeling. So to really be able to unlock and activate and move this energy and surface it, and use our breath, which is a built-in technology that we have to work through this and be able to turn to it as a tool. So to add this into your support system here. And something we've been talking about a lot is that this anti-racism work is really a spiritual practice. A spiritual practice, like a daily sadhana, is something that you do every day for your mental health, for your growth, for your personal development and evolution. And this work, and I love how Nikki put it, this work for greater humanity, it is a spiritual practice. So for us to put in the time every day and to really integrate it, just as we do with our meditation practices. We receive information when we're meditating, and we also want to put that into action. Okay, thank you, Serena, for that. So we want to take this time in between to do some breath work, to do some meditations, and these are tools that you can then use at home. And a lot of these breaths and meditations are only 3 minutes long. So they're definitely something that you can fit in, and then after you can really put into action, you can move from that space. So let's see, we are going to first do some embodiment work, and this breath is so awesome. It's called Fists of Anger, and I heard a lot of you say that anger has been surfacing for you, and as a collective we're feeling into this collective anger, and that's actually fantastic. Because this anger is what is able to fuel us, and we can transform and transmute it into action states, but we want to make sure that we're taking action from our heart. And because what we're really wanting here is love, compassion, equality, community, greater connection, and all of that anger wants to be almost like, if you think of the fire element, fire burns things really quickly. So when we're using our breath, we're creating this fire to burn through and then recreate how we want to be, or how we want to show up in full presence. When we're in our full presence, and Brandy was talking about our nervous system, strengthening our container, our nervous system. Our nervous system is like our tree roots that run throughout our whole body. And when that is stronger, we can hold more intensity. So if you think of like a big barrel, like a seal barrel, that can hold way more joy or fear or whatever is coming up for you, grief. We can just hold the intensity of that and be with it and be present with it and still show up in our full presence and not just be in reaction mode to whatever that is, or not be able to contain it at all and just be frantic, have that frantic kind of energy going on. So that's what we're working on today. All of these exercises really do help strengthen our nervous system so we can hold more of that intensity and show up fully in it. So Fists of Anger, what we're going to do for this. So finding yourself in a nice, comfortable seated position again. Our thumbs represent our ego or our experience. We're bringing our thumbs into the pads of our hands and pressing our other fingers around it as if we're making fists. And the movement that we're doing is a backstroke like this. So we're bringing our hands up and back, and our breath is through an O-shaped mouth, and we're breathing out powerfully. So it will be beautiful. That's exactly it. And I just want to make sure that everyone feels that they've got that down before we begin, because we'll be there for 3 minutes. It's a really detoxing breath. We're bringing a lot of oxygen into our bloodstream, into our organs. We're circulating, we're moving things up. Whatever surfaces during this time is fantastic, and we're going to use our breath in this movement to really move through it and to surface it. We want it to come up. And so our eyes are closed. This is a very internal experience. We want to bring our awareness into our internal state. So our eyes are closed as we're doing it. And I think my computer is still connected. So I'm going to play some tribal music that you can breathe to really move through, and see if you can stay with it this whole 3 minutes. I'm going to get the stopwatch up and ready. Any questions before we begin? Container set. Okay, fantastic. And Brandy, if you can let me know if this music comes through. I don't think you have to even change me over to the host. I think. Is it it coming through? Okay, great. I'm gonna turn it up just a little bit more. All right, ladies, let's get our hands into fists. Eyes are closed, looking upward and inward, and let's begin. Nice, powerful breath. One minute down, you're doing great. Stay with your breath, stay with this movement. It's okay to be angry, to really feel how angry you are. The breath is going to help surface this. It's important to feel our anger and this collective anger and be with it, to feel it, transform it. Keep going. One last minute. You may feel some heat rise. If you're tasting any metals in your mouth, it's just your body detoxing. Keep moving through. Allow any visuals to come through. If you're truly committed to creating a world and communities that are based in love, compassion, and equality, then we must transmute this anger into action. Action from the heart. Keep going. 30 more seconds. Last 10 seconds. And inhale your arms up. Stretch them up, up, up. Plug your fingertips up into the sky. And exhale, slowly glide your hands down along your side. And keep your eyes closed here, hands in your lap, allowing this energy to settle. Anchoring in to your subtle vibration that you can feel right now. Asking our breath to clear, to surface. Whatever wants to come up and be seen, transmuted, and brought into this discussion. And in this space of stillness and calm, setting an intention for yourself for clarity, openness, being open to receive, opening to share these vulnerable parts of us. And really feeling into how all of our emotions are super helpful to guide us into deeper understandings of ourselves and others, and how there's so much to unlock and explore in this sense of anger and grief that we're feeling as a collective. Feeling into how powerful our emotions are, how they guide us and shape us. And how they help us dismantle old beliefs so we can create a new, and projecting that vision out for all of humanity, that these old belief systems can take a new shape. Projecting that out to our loved ones, to people in deep grief, to ourselves, feeling the collective rise. Taking a nice deep inhale and exhale. One more nice deep inhale and exhale. Slowly opening your eyes and coming back into the space. Beautiful work, ladies. Beautiful breath. Thank you so much for going there. Good job. I'll pass it back over to Bea so we can get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. That was awesome. And anger is a really important transformative emotion to fuel this movement. So many of us, especially as women, are unwilling to feel angry because we've been made to believe that we're not supposed to feel angry, that it's unladylike to get angry. And when we are unwilling to feel anger, we actually just keep ourselves in the emotions of shame and guilt because we're unwilling to pass through like the gateway of anger. And so we just stay ashamed of, oh, well, I haven't been participating in this conversation of racism, so I'm just going to get small and I'm just going to hide and just withdraw and try not to be seen and just wait for this to pass. And really what's needed and what's necessary is for us to allow ourselves to get really angry about what's happening. And often when we allow ourselves to get angry, it's not a neat process. So we have to give ourselves permission to let it be messy and to let ourselves mess up and make mistakes and be wrong and look bad. So that technique that Chris just taught, the fists of anger, is a really helpful technique for as we're increasingly putting ourselves in these spaces of discomfort and having these conversations and standing out and speaking up. That's us leaning into all of the intensity that's going to have to come through. And a lot of that is going to be anger. And if we can use the power of anger. Anger is like such an alive emotion. When we feel angry, there's like so much energy moving through our bodies, and we can use that energy and channel it into the change that we wish to see in the world, rather than trying to avoid the anger, trying to run from it, trying to tone it down, which ends up resulting in us just taking ourselves out of the conversation. So we invite you to take these practices and use them ongoingly, and that's why we're weaving them into the curriculum today. So you should all now have access to the Google Doc, and if you want to follow along in there, you're welcome to, and you don't need to. I'm going to be reading everything aloud. So first, we want to start off the conversation by identifying some key terms that we think are really necessary to know in order to be effective activists. For some of you, this is completely old news. For some of you, this is brand new. So if you have any questions about this, again, do not hesitate to raise your hand and ask a question, even if you think that it's stupid or you should know the answer to it. This is a space where anybody can ask anything. Judgment-free zone here. Yeah. So the first term that I want to define is dominant narratives. And I know we have quite a lot of vegans on this call, which is awesome. So the person who actually wrote this quote that I'm about to read is Melanie Joy. who you all are probably familiar with. She wrote the book, Why We Love Dogs. Love dogs, wear cows, and eat pigs. Is that what it is? Something like that. Anyway, so she's talking about carnism, which is another system of oppression, but it's completely applicable to race, and it's the same thing. And she talks about how all of these systems of oppression and all of these hierarchies of power really map onto each other, and the way that any sentient being is oppressed, it's exactly the same. It's the same system. The way that we justify the oppression of any sentient being, it's the same mechanism that makes that work. So she says, dominant narratives are the stories told by the dominant culture. They define our reality and guide our lives like an invisible hand. And when the dominant culture is oppressive, so too are its narratives. Such narratives are fictions, constructed to delude people into supporting the dominant way of life, even though that way of life runs counter to what they would otherwise support. That's a really important piece here, okay? So such narratives are fictions constructed to delude people into supporting the dominant way of life, even though that way of life runs counter to what they would otherwise support. So for example, so many of us say, well, I'm not racist. And what we mean is I intend to not be racist, but there's a difference between intent and impact. So we can intend to not be racist, but if the impact of it is to perpetuate racism, then we were in fact being racist. So that's what she's talking about here, where these fictions delude people into supporting the dominant way of life, which in our society is racist, even though that way of life runs counter to what they would otherwise support. And dominant narratives silence the voices of people who seek to tell the truth. Thus, social change is made possible by those who challenge the dominant narratives, replacing fictions with facts by bearing witness to and speaking out against oppression. Revolutions that change the course of history are made possible by those who speak truth to power. I absolutely love that quote so much. So in my perspective, everything that we're witnessing that's happening in the collective right now is really a result of the dominant narratives that our society invented 500 years ago. The concept of race is something that white people invented when they were colonizing America in order to justify enslaving and killing Black people. Like race, there's only one race on this planet, it's the human race. But this concept that we all have in our minds, that there are all these different races, is really just something that the dominant group in power invented. It's a fiction, it's a story that they told in order to justify using and abusing and commodifying other people, right? Black people in this case. So dominant narratives are the water that we're swimming in. When you're born into a society where the dominant narratives are racist, then racism actually becomes the water that we're swimming in. So it's invisible to us, which is why so many people are saying systemic racism doesn't exist. And I'm sure you all know the little parable of the two fish swimming in water, and the one fish saying to the other fish, "How's the water this morning?" And the first fish saying, "What the hell is water?" And it's this idea that when we are completely surrounded by something, when something is omnipresent, when it's everywhere, we have no way to identify it or see it. A way that one of my mentors, Carolyn Heldman, describes it is she's like, it's like being raised in a red room, never leaving the red room, and then being asked to describe the color red. You have nothing against which to compare it, so it's so hard to describe what it is, which is why this work of anti-racism can be really tricky and really frustrating, because we're constantly confronted with people saying, red doesn't exist, there's no such thing as red. Or, what the hell is water? I don't understand, what is this water that you're speaking of? And it's because it's so omnipresent that it's so hard for people to identify, especially those who benefit from not identifying it and not speaking about it. It's very easy to conveniently ignore. So dominant narratives, I'd love to hear in the chat box, what are some dominant narratives that our society tells about Black people? And again, these are fictions, so you saying this in the chat box doesn't mean that you believe this, it just means that you're able to identify. Yeah, so Black people are criminals, what else? Lazy, more athletic, uneducated, good dancers, performers, poor, violent, loud, the angry Black woman stereotype, lower IQ. So if we've been told our whole lives by our culture, because remember, these dominant narratives and racism is woven into the fabric of existence in our society. So if we're born into a society where these narratives are so omnipresent, and we're being fed these narratives with every sitcom we watch, every movie we watch, every magazine we open, every radio station we listen to, every billboard we see, if we're subconsciously constantly being fed this messaging, then that shapes the way that we relate to people who have that certain identity. So if we look at the fact that many of the dominant narratives we've been fed about Black people in this society is that they're violent, they're criminals, they're less intelligent, that they're angry, that they're out to get white people, these are the dominant narratives that we've been fed. So of course, police are 3 times more likely to kill a Black person than they are to kill a white person, because they've been made to believe that a Black person is more likely to hurt them or to kill them. So it's really the insidious dominant narratives that need to be addressed first and foremost here, because it gives our occurring of the world. It gives what we see. It becomes the lens through which we look at life. And if we're looking through the lens, if we're looking through the belief system that Black people are violent and they're criminals, then that's going to give the actions that we take. So I'm more likely to believe that I need to defend myself, that my survival is in threat when I'm in the presence of a Black person. So I want us all to just close our eyes really quickly, because real quick, before we close our eyes, one of the things that's challenging about conversations of race is really overcoming this cognitive dissonance. So many of us identify as being a good person, and we do so many quote unquote good things in this world. So because our identity is, well, I'm a good person, and because we've been made to believe by our society that you're either a good person who's not racist, or you're a bad person who is racist, then it's really hard for us to see the ways that these dominant narratives have infiltrated our own minds. And when we can't see it, then it can't be dealt with. So one of the ways for us to be able to really do this shadow work and pull out these dominant narratives from the shadows of our being, from the places that they hide, is by looking at our feeling rather than our conscious thought. So if we close our eyes for a minute and we imagine that we are walking alone at night in a city. We're by ourselves, it's dark, there's no one around. And all of a sudden, a person rounds a corner right in front of us. And we're startled that somebody just rounded the corner. But then we look and see that it's a white woman. So just feel into how you feel in your body, realizing now that it's dark, you're alone, and there's a white woman walking towards you in the middle of the night. And just notice that without judgment. How does that feel in your body? All right, now erase that scene from your mind. And now we're going to imagine that we're walking alone by ourselves in the middle of the night in a city. And all of a sudden somebody rounds the corner right in front of us and we're startled. And we realize that it's a Black man. And this Black man is walking towards us. We're alone in the middle of the night in a city. How does that feel in your body? Again, not judging it, not making it mean anything about you at all, just simply being aware of how that feels. All right. And allowing all those scenes to dissolve and just coming back to the present moment, sitting here safely. Open your eyes when you're ready. Yeah. So I personally felt more of a contraction in my body when I noticed that it was a Black man walking towards me. I felt a little more of like, oh, I should walk faster. So I'm curious what other people felt in their bodies. And before we share that, I want to clarify something. So having a racist thought or emotion does not mean anything about us, because we have been programmed to have those thoughts by our society. Okay? All of these dominant narratives that we've been fed by our society is like this little chip that was put in our brain when we were born into a white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist society. So our minds are just the echo chambers of that society. So having those thoughts or having those feelings does not mean that you are a bad person. It doesn't actually mean anything about you. And that's one of the exercises we're going to do later, of making these thoughts and emotions an object of our awareness and just looking at them with curiosity, rather than reacting to them, rather than attaching to them, rather than being averse to them, rather than making them mean anything. Just, oh, interesting. Oh, I just had a racist thought. Okay. Well, that's not mine. That's not mine. That's just the little satellite antenna of my brain picking up on the racist dominant narratives of my society. So I'm recognizing that that's not mine, and I'm willing to own up to that I just had that thought, and I'm not making it mean anything. So I just wanted to create that context, because I know sometimes we have fear around saying like, yeah, I had a different reaction in my body if I thought it was a Black man walking towards me. So just a couple shares. How was that exercise for you? What did you notice?
I'll jump in. So what's wild is my brain goes into all these what ifs. I'm like, well, if it's a white woman that's just like looking like she came from a PTA meeting, or a white woman who looks like she's in some kind of a manic episode, I would have a different reaction regardless of the skin color she had. And then I thought, when the Black man came around the corner, I'm like, well, I don't have discomfort with Black men. I have discomfort sometimes with men. Curious about who's, but then I also flipped into the narrative that I started years ago when I was living in Los Angeles, that I am a big woman. I'm a tall woman, and I have like repellent energy that will dismantle any like violent attempt to my person. And it's worked. Like, I've been in DC, Baltimore, LA, and all kinds of places, and not felt an ounce of fear. So I'm not sure that I'm the best example of that, but I did want to throw that out there, that there's so many layers. It's so complicated, I feel, to really access that part.
Yeah, and all those different scenarios indicate all the other dominant narratives that exist as well. And I noticed Melissa put in the chat box, I felt more constricted when it was a Black male. Then I wondered, well, how is he dressed? What does his body language look like? And she felt relief when it was a woman. Yeah, so the how is he dressed? That's another narrative of classism, right? And this is intersectionality. This is how all these dominant narratives map onto each other. So if we assess that, oh, that person seems like they're upper class, then the majority of us are more likely to feel more comfortable in their company. Or I don't know if any of you saw the interview of, the bird watcher in Central Park who asked the woman to put her dog on a leash, and then she knew her power as a white woman and called the police and said that he was threatening her life, and he caught it on video, and that was absolutely not true. So that man, in one of his interviews, was talking about how, so in his interview, he's wearing these gold rimmed glasses that look like very intellectual glasses. And in his interview, he said, do you think I need these? Like, I don't wear these because I need these. I wear these to make white people more comfortable around me, because I know that if they see me wearing gold glasses that make me look like an intellectual, they'll assume, oh, okay, well, you're not one of those hoodlum Blacks. You're not one of those thug Blacks. You're an upper class Black. So I feel more comfortable around you in your presence. So all of these different context clues, and it's just a really interesting exercise. Like, okay, so if it was a Black man that walked around the corner and was in a suit and tie, how would I feel? If it was a Black man that walked around the corner and was wearing a black hoodie with his hood up and sweatpants and a chain, how would I feel? If it was a white woman that looked like she just came from a PTA meeting. So the point of this exercise was for us to identify how all of these dominant narratives really become the filter through which we see life. And it's just, what's the word? It's automatic. It's inadvertent. It's not like we really cognitively think of, oh, well, because this person is wearing a black hoodie, therefore I feel this way about them. It's just our automatic programming. And again, it's not ours. It's just these fictions that we've been told by our society that lead to these in the moment, quick judgments that we have. Yeah. Does anybody else want to share how that was for them? And welcome, Allie. Glad you're here.
Yeah, I can share too. I think it's an interesting conversation because I kind of had a similar reaction to you, Nikki, where like I imagined the woman, but I was like, well, what is she doing? And then I imagined the man, and I was like, well, even if it was a white man, I would be on edge, you know, because it's a man, and I'm actually a really tiny girl. I mean, I'm strong, but I'm 5'1", and I'm small, and I often don't wear a bra, so I'm just like a wild woman, and so I'm an easy target in a way. So I get uncomfortable no matter what kind of man, no matter what he's wearing. It's just I'm on edge. Like, okay, there's a man there, and I'm aware. And so, but I also understand what you're saying, Brandy, of like, you know, then there's those layers of sexism and classism, and then there's also the layer of being street smart, and then how those two intersect. Because as a small, tiny, young woman, I do have to be aware of my surroundings. But I also understand that there are those filters that are coming in that are affecting me from really seeing the person as they are in certain situations. And so I appreciate this exercise. I think it's really important, and I agree. I think it's complicated in a big way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that question of street smartness is such a tricky one, because a lot of these police officers who have killed these unarmed black men, they're saying, well, it was in self-defense. And it's like, well, would you have felt the need to defend yourself if it was a white man? It's just statistically less likely that you would have felt the need to kill that person if it was a white man, even if the white man did exactly the same thing. So it's tricky to parse out, like, where is the I'm just being smart versus where am I being discriminatory? Which is why there's so much nuance to these conversations. And by our willingness to own up to when we have these instantaneous implicit bias judgment reactions, when we're willing to own up to them, then we can actually have productive conversations where we parse through the nuance of it. But again, many of our fixed identity, like how we relate to ourselves as, well, I'm a good person and I'm a social justice activist and I don't discriminate against people, it actually gets in our way of being effective activists, because it makes it so that these types of nuanced conversations don't happen, which we'll get into that a little later.
Can I share something, Brandy?
Yeah.
About the street smart? Because when you brought us through that exercise, I remembered this old memory of when I lived in Philly for 7 years. And I actually remembered a time when I was walking down the street and there was a black man coming towards me. And when he came towards me, he like jumped towards me to kind of scare me. He wasn't planning on causing any harm, but he wanted to see a reaction, and he kept going. And in the vision that I had when we were going through it, I stopped and turned to him, and we had a conversation about why did you just do that, to create some fear. And because there's so much tension in Philadelphia, there was so much gentrification happening and so many people getting pushed out of their communities, and they were seeing us young college students coming in, and there was a lot of anger that you felt walking around the street. And it was really cool just to go through that visualization and have this sense of healing. Like, we got to connect on the sidewalk, and he's like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. I'm just having a really bad day. And it just like felt like, whether that's the story or not, it just felt good to revisit that memory and to create more, it's like a less of a reaction to my nervous system around it. So thank you for that.
I love that. Going back and rewriting those stories, rewriting how it played out. Yeah, awesome. Okay. Any other shares before we move on? Okay, so I don't know why I muted myself. Next definition, again, this is by Melanie Joy. This is the last quote by her. And what we're defining here is violent ideologies. So violent ideologies, and they're a type of dominant narrative, by the way. Violent ideologies speak their own language. Core concepts are translated to maintain the system while appearing to support the people. But violent ideologies are inherently undemocratic as they rely on deception, secrecy, concentrated power, and coercion, all practices that are incompatible with a free society. While the larger system or nation may appear democratic, the violent system within it is not. This is one reason we don't recognize violent ideologies that exist within seemingly democratic societies. We simply aren't thinking to look for them. As with any violent ideology, the populace must be shielded from direct exposure to the victims of the system, lest they begin questioning the system or their participation in it. And for those of us who are animal activists, we know that, you know, animals in factory farms, there's a reason why the farms are brick and there's no windows to any of these that you can't see in. And this is an example of being shielded from the victims of the violent ideology, from the victims of the system. And the same is Black people who are incarcerated at disproportionately higher rates. Like, where are they? We don't see them. Why? Because they're shielded from all of our view. So these are ways that these dominant narratives and these violent ideologies have the self-protective mechanisms that keep people from getting too close, keep people from really understanding the functionality of how these violent ideologies work. And again, if anybody has any questions or comments as I go through these definitions, just raise your hand. Okay. All right, so white fragility. White fragility is the discomfort, defensiveness, and the tendency to self-center on the part of a white person when confronted by information about racial inequality and injustice. So the discomfort, defensiveness, and tendency to self-center or make it about us on the part of a white person when confronted by information about racial inequality and injustice. So I'll give you an example of my own white fragility that I noticed lately. So there's a lot of these conversations happening around, well, when all this is over, all you white people are just going to go back to doing what you were doing before and ignoring this. You're only speaking out about it right now because you're getting cookies for it. You're getting kudos for it. You're getting a pat on the back for it. And you weren't talking about it before, and you're not going to talk about it in the future. So hearing some of this discourses go on, rather than really like critically engaging in the discourse, my agenda becomes to prove that I'm not one of those white people, right? Well, I don't do that. I'm not one of those white people. Here, let me explain to you. And then I go into trying to establish my anti-racist credentials and convince people of how good of an anti-racist I have been and will continue to be. And that's an example of white fragility, where rather than critically engaging in the conversation, I'm making it about me and making it about me trying to establish how good of an anti-racist I've been and saying, well, I'm not like those white people. I'm not that kind of white person. It's a deflection. So I'm curious if anybody else has an example that they've noticed of themselves in this conversation and in all of this discourse around race. Have you noticed any of your own white fragility arise where you get defensive? Yeah, Nikki.
I'm sorry, I switched to my computer. I don't know where the hand thing is. But I love that you're saying this because I was at the Pioneers in Northern California last October, and there was a colored women in power panel. And I'm genuinely curious. I followed Marianne Williamson and what she teaches forever. And I love her constant reinforcement of the need to atone, not just stop, and have bills and laws placed, but really roll the clock back and do the healing that's been necessary all along. Indigenous cultures, African Americans, women, like all of it, we have to go through the painful part. We're not going to make any progress. And so I wanted to bring this conversation, this topic up because all the women were talking about was reparations, and I totally get that too. I 1,000% get the financial reparations is a high priority. Of the apology, like the authentic on my knees and I'm so fucking sorry apology that I feel needs to be brought up, Am I broken? My connection's kind of weak.
You're good now. We lost you for a minute right before you said the reparations thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So the reparation thing is very important. But I was just curious about what their perspective was, how meaningful it felt for them to receive a genuine apology, like an on our knees, I am so sorry on behalf of my ancestors. I really am sorry. Like how important that was. And so I'm at the mic and I'm asking these ladies this. And one woman spoke up in a very nostril flared, angry energy. And I can't remember her actual words because I kind of went into like deer in headlights mode. But she was like basically saying, all I want is your money. I don't care about any of that shit. That's whatever. I want money. I want money. And that's the only conversation I want to have. I basically felt this big and like a complete asshole. And I'm like, wow, okay. And so what my ego wanted to do was kind of patch myself up and be like, it's okay, baby. You were just trying. But then I'm like, no, let her beat you up for a second. Like, really, this is her. She's got a mountain of energetic abuse and wounding and oppression far beyond anything I can ever comprehend. So I really had to sit in my humble pie and be like, okay, I was her punching bag. She just totally let me have it. And I'm going to let this question go for now. And I'll ask somebody at a later day, like what their thoughts are. But I did notice that I was like feeling pretty bruised. I'm like, wow, I need a hug right now, you guys. But it was also, I think, very necessary for me to just hold that space and get my ass kicked.
Yeah, I love that. You're like, okay, yeah, great, have at me. I recognize that I'm the dominant group in power here that benefits off of your oppression, and you rightfully have so much anger. And the discomfort that I'm feeling in this moment with you yelling at me is the discomfort that you feel all day, every day. So I can take this for a second, especially if it's gonna let you get something off your chest and help me see how this is one perspective, and everybody has a different idea of what it'll look like to repair this. And this is your perspective. Okay. Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing. Okay, Melissa has her hand up.
Yeah, on the white fragility, I've, this past week, I've posted on Facebook about Kehinde Wiley, the artist. And I kind of felt that how, it's like I'm speaking out now just to get like a pat on the back, where like I haven't really talked about him publicly before, but all of a sudden this is happening. So I'm going to post something. And I was like, the second I posted it, I felt that. And like people are like commending me with like comments like, oh, you're so great. And I'm just like, fuck, like, man. So yeah, I felt that. And I've painted a pair of shoes. I paint my shoes to have conversations, and I dedicate a pair of shoes to him. And this was over a year ago, but like I never really like talked about it until now. So I totally get what you're saying with the white fragility. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Anybody else have an example?
The Zoom call that I mentioned that I joined on, where there was a lady that was really angry, and she addressed the white participants on the Zoom call. She was like, "How dare you?" And I can't. Well, it's like, she started with, "How dare you be here? How dare you be on this Zoom call? How dare you act like you care? Like, where have you been?" And yeah, I just I didn't know how to deal with that, and afterwards I felt upset for like a day or two about it, and then I felt like, well, I don't want to go back because I don't want to get yelled at, but yet if I'm not there next time, and if other white people don't join the call next time, then that's going to be noticed too, and people are going to be disappointed or get confirmation that, yeah, the white people are only fair weather, or just in it momentarily. So yeah, I think I have a lot of fragility, so I'm glad to be in this conversation and explore that, and I appreciate what you said earlier about you and Chris about using the breath as a tool and a technology to navigate through discomfort to get into the work. Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful. Something that Kellyanne Maddox says, which we're gonna send you out a resource guide to all of you after this of resources that we found very helpful and informative. And on there is a YouTube video on anti-racism shadow work that I think is excellent. And I called myself out so many times watching this video. And something that she says is, of course, Black people aren't going to believe you. Of course, they're not going to believe that you're actually in this for the right reasons, not just to get a cookie or a pat on the back. So the only way to disprove them is to show up consistently. Just keep showing up, 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 keep showing up. And then eventually it's like, oh, okay. So you're even showing up when you're not getting praise, when you're not getting approval. You're even showing up when we tell you that you're wrong for the way that you're thinking. You're even showing up when it's uncomfortable. You're even showing up when you don't get acknowledged. You're even showing up when nobody even knows that you're there. So we know it's not for the approval. So I love that. And kind of the analogy that I thought of in that instance is like if you're a little kid and your parent, let's say you have a single mom and this mom keeps dating guys who are just like flakes and are there and show up and bring you presents, and then the next week they're just completely out of your life. If that's what your experience has been of these men in your mom's life, then of course the next time a guy comes around, you're just going to assume like, yeah, okay, you're bringing me this present and you're trying to woo me right now, but I know you're not going to stick around. And the only way that that guy can disprove that is by showing up consistently over and over and over again for a long period of time, so that the kid can finally realize like, oh, wait a second, can I actually trust you? Yeah, it's awesome. And I know that feeling. When I sent out the email about this workshop, I got an email back that was basically like, what are your credentials? Who are you to be hosting this workshop? Like, do you specialize in this, blah, blah, blah. And as soon as I got that email, I felt like I was in second grade and I was being screamed at by my teacher. Like I felt like, oh no, I'm in trouble. Oh no, I got in trouble. And then it's like, you know what? That's a good sign. The fact that I feel this means that I'm actually putting myself out there. Like if I'm not feeling that feeling of, oh no, I was made wrong. Oh no, I'm in trouble. Then that means I'm not taking any risks and actually putting myself out there. So I'm trying to kind of reframe it as a good thing. Every time I get called out, every time someone says, actually, this is what you need to do, or this is what you need to say. It's like, okay, cool. I got to the gold. Yeah, awesome. Any other shares about white fragility?
Yeah, I have one. And this was amongst a group of other white people that just, I felt shame for admitting. Okay, so I'm part of this Lean In circle for work, and it's like a women's group where we support each other and talk about how we can create more opportunities for women, but we've been focusing on everything going on with Black Lives Matter and how can we be a better asset and ally to our Black brothers and sisters, especially Black women. And we were having an honest conversation about like the water we're swimming in and how thoughts happen that just we don't even notice until we notice. So I was vulnerably sharing what I do for a living is over the phone sales essentially. And I was talking to what sounded like probably a Black woman the other day. And I had the thought once we got to the financial aspect of our conversation that, oh no, maybe she can't afford this. And I was thinking, as soon as I had that thought, I was like, wow, do I think that when I talk to a sounding white person? You know, like, wow, I can't believe I had that thought, and then kind of shaming myself for it. So anyway, I vulnerably shared this with the women in my group and just crickets. I was like, oh my God, I shared too much. Like, maybe I should never admit that. I had that thought. Like, I'm not a good white person. I'm not being a good person in general. It just made me feel really fragile and made me feel like now I have to explain myself and why I had this thought and how it's not really aligned with who I am and blah, 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 you know, just like mental and probably actual word vomit about my experience and just really needing to bolster myself and not look like a bad person in front of this peer group. And it was just really interesting to notice.
Yeah, good awareness of that, of like, oh, nobody's saying anything, oh no, you know. And that's the key really to being a better activist, is to be willing to be in those spaces and be willing to sit with that discomfort and not go and hide, not be like, okay, well, that was too intense, so never gonna do that again, never gonna vulnerably share that again, never gonna go to a meeting with mostly Black people again. Like, being willing to sit with that discomfort without retracting and pulling back and getting small. Yeah, okay. All right, next definition is white privilege. So white privilege is inherent and most often unseen and unconscious advantages possessed by a white person on the basis of their race in a society characterized by racial inequality and injustice. So examples of white privilege are being able to walk into a store and find that the main displays of shampoo and pantyhose are catered toward your hair type and skin tone. It's being able to turn on the television and see people of your race widely represented. It's being able to move through life without being racially profiled or unfairly stereotyped. Yeah. So example of this for me is a couple weeks ago, we locked ourselves out of our house, out of our townhouse here, and we had just moved in here not that long before. And I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna see if I can like go around to the back and see if I can get into the bedroom window so that we can go inside and get our keys. So I come around the back and I'm on my hands and knees trying to unscrew the bolts of this window and like pry it open. And then all of a sudden, the window that I'm trying to break into opens. And there's this man that just leans over and goes, can I help you? And it was the window right next to our house. It was the townhouse right next to us. And we had just moved in, so I'd never met this neighbor. So I'm a complete stranger that to him, it completely looked like I was just trying to break into his house in broad daylight. Like literally on my hands and knees trying to pry his window open. And all he does is open the window and say, hello, can I help you, stranger? And that was one of those moments where I was like, damn, if I was a Black man and that guy had a gun, like I probably would have been shot. Like, that is white privilege. Me being able to make the very stupid mistake of trying to break into my neighbor who I'd never met before's house. And the only consequence that I faced, the only consequence was that he said, can I help you? And was immediately forgiving. And we had a very pleasant conversation afterwards. Whereas again, if I were a Black man, even if he called the police on me, that could have been a death sentence. Right? The police coming to inquire about, why are you trying to break into this house? Oh, we don't believe your sob story about you locked your keys out and you live next door. Like nobody would do that. That's too stupid. So that's an example that I have. Yeah. Allie, do you want to share what you typed in there?
Yeah, it was so interesting to listen and then also to be typing. But I just wanted, can you hear me? Okay. I just wanted to say, like, I think, Serena, your share was really, really powerful, and it like really hit me hard, because there are moments where I've had experiences like that too. And I know a lot of white people and people in general have had their prejudice in those kinds of relationships, in the workplace and also in the education system. And so I love also, Brandy, how you were like, yeah, learning to just sit with that reaction of people being quiet and like, yeah, deal with it, deal with that prejudice. And then also pivoting and being able to look at and empathize with like, well, how does it feel on the receiving end, you know, for a person of color to approach like any kind of retreat or course or work interview or education system and be like in the back of their mind, like this person either is thinking that I am not smart enough or I'm too poor or any of those stereotypes that we mentioned earlier. I'm dangerous, I'm a thug, you know, whatever those words are that are just the unconscious programming. And so to really sit with that, like, whoa, like that must feel really intense, you know, and to be in the space of both, I think is, is part of the work. And so I just really loved your share, and it hit home for me too. And I'm really, really grateful that you voiced what you voiced, and that we're learning to, as white people, sit in our discomfort and also hold space for the discomfort that's going on every day, you know, on the other end. So thanks.
Yeah, a quote by Kellyanne Maddox, that woman who does the video I recommend. She says, we need to train our ego to sit in the naughty chair. I love that. Like, I think to me, that's what we need to do to be better activists. Train our ego to be willing to sit in the naughty chair. Like, okay, I did it wrong. I'm accepting that I did it wrong and I'm here to learn. And that's okay. The fact that I'm sitting with discomfort means that I'm doing something. Yeah, awesome. So in the chat box, or if you want to unmute yourself and share, I'd love to hear just other examples of white privilege that you've either experienced yourself or that you've seen somebody else experience, just so that we can see the omnipresence of this. An example someone gave was a Black woman getting on the plane. And you know how sometimes the airlines mess up and assign 2 people to the same seat? You know, it's happened to me many times. So a Black woman getting on the plane, and then there being somebody sitting in her seat and her saying like, oh, you're sitting in my seat. And then the airline attendant saying, no, that's not your, because it was in first class, that's not your seat. You don't sit there. You got it wrong. This person, this white man, that's his seat. You don't sit there. So that's another example of it. Any other examples? Obviously, white people getting paid more is a huge example. Being less likely to be incarcerated. What are other examples?
Yeah, I can share. So this is Felix speaking. I'm Serena's husband, Brandy's brother-in-law. And so I'm half Hispanic and half white. My mom's from Peru. I was born in Germany. And I skated with a lot of different people when I was younger. Hold on, give me 1 second. This story always makes me like really angry. I was skating with a friend of mine who was Black, and we decided to stop at a grocery store so I could get an iced tea. You know, nothing unusual there. And he decided to stay in the car, and I locked the door by accident, just out of habit. And I went inside and I checked out, and on my way out, he came running in. He goes, hey, you locked me in. I got out, the car alarm's going off. And I said, okay. So we went out there, and I hear my car alarm going off, and I hit the button, and it goes off. And while this is happening, we see a police car roll up, and they get out, they approach us. They immediately tell my friend to turn around, put his hands behind his back. And I asked what it's about, and they said they had a call that a Black man was trying to break into a car. And I keep telling him it's my car. So they take my friend Greg and they sit him down on the curb, and they start running his information. And the other cop takes me over to my car. I open my car, I give him my, my registration, my driver's license, and he looks at it and he's like, oh, okay, all right, well, you're good to go. And I said, what about him? And they're like, well, we're just going to finish running his information, and then, he's good to go too. And I was like, that's bullshit. Like, this is my car. I accidentally locked him in. Like, why does any of this need to happen? And he's like, oh, well, it's just standard procedure and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't really push it any further. And, my friend Greg didn't even think twice about it. It was just, another day for him. And what really rubbed me the wrong way was not just the way the police treated him, but the fact that somebody called the police on him without any context. I've never had the police called on me because my car alarm went off until there was a Black guy near it. And it pissed me off. And, I skated with a lot of different people from a lot of different ethnicities, and skaters always get hassled by the cops. It's just it's just a thing that happens. And it was always a different experience when I was with my friends who were, more ethnically diverse than when I was skating with my white friends. When it was just us, like a bunch of white kids, it was always, hey, get out of here, before we have to do something. And whenever it was me skating with, my Black friend or a couple of Hispanic friends, they would always take our information. They would always, run our background checks and stuff like that. And so it's just another example of how differently people are treated. There's also a lot of studies that are done that white people in general don't commit less crimes. They're just around less police in general. And you think about inner city, there's more police, there's more opportunity for somebody to get caught. And if your information is always being run, there's a chance something might come up, you know, expired registration for your car, for example, or something like that. And then you just have an excuse to be arrested. But that story, and I'm sorry, I'm a little shaky, but it always makes me really mad because I just feel so bad for my friend Greg, who was the nicest guy. I think a couple people in here knew him. And it's unfair, you know, it's truly unfair.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that story, Felix, and thank you for being here. Wow. Yeah, I was sitting with a family member one time, and a Black guy ran by with a bag in his hand, and the family member said, wow, I wonder what he just stole. Just the assumption that a Black guy running with something in his hand must have stolen whatever he's running with. Yeah. Anybody else have an example of?
I have one.
Great.
So I work in a corporation, and one of my team members is Black, and we had a town hall on Friday where we spoke about George Floyd and just kind of shared sentiments around the room with about 200 people on the call. And one of my closest team members is a Black man, one of the few in this industry. And he shared how he has to put on a mask every day that he comes into work, and that he has to dress better than every other white person. And he has to be flashy so that he gets even maybe the same level of respect as a white man. And how his 150% is equal to like a white man's 80%. And he spoke about how from the time he was 10 years old, growing up in Texas and in the South, he had to monitor his actions, and how it was part of, you know, he knew in his mind that he had to act a certain way to not get profiled, to not experience racism. And another woman on the call, who was a Black woman, spoke about this fear that she lives with every day with her Black husband, because even though they're both educated and both of them come from families who have been very successful financially, they went to great schools, that doesn't stop her husband from being a Black man on the road every time that he's driving. You know, with all the resources that their family was able to provide for them, they still couldn't help them from being born Black. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on like some stories about white privilege that I've heard lately.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, my friend Deidre, the woman who helped come up with ideas for this curriculum, was sharing with me about how her sons, which are Black people, one of her sons is like 16 years old, and when he is walking to Target, they live close to a Target, and before he leaves to walk to Target, she reminds him, like, okay, make sure your hoodie's not on, take your hoodie off, like if you get pulled over, if a cop tries to say something to you, like put your hands behind your back or put your hands up and say, my name is blah blah blah, and I'm unarmed and I have no intent to hurt anybody. Like they have to rehearse these sorts of things. And she also explained that she was like, you know how as women, we carry this additional burden everywhere we go. Like the burden of feeling like we have to know what's going on emotionally with everybody around us. And we feel like if somebody's upset, it's our responsibility to fix that upset. And we feel the burden of the household chores more so than our male counterparts. And we have to have the grocery list running in our heads and be thinking about, okay, when are the dishes going to get done? And like all of this additional burden that we carry as women. And she's like, so take that and then multiply it by however much. And like, that's what Black people of color experience in this society. And then when we think about intersectionality, it's like, if you're a Black woman, then it's layering those burdens on top of one another and just having to carry around that extra weight and concern with you everywhere you go, which I thought was a really great way of identifying what that feels like. Shannon says, it's so hard for us to see white privilege because we aren't Black and don't experience it. Examples are really helpful. Yeah, so I'll read a couple other examples, and this is from the White Privilege Checklist by Peggy Mcintosh. So these are examples of white privilege. I can arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. So Black people in America, like 99% of Black people have white people that they interact with every single day consistently. Whereas very few white people in America have Black people that they interact with, know personally, know intimately, and interact with on a daily basis. Serena, do you remember that statistic? I think it was you that told me.
It's actually very, very bad. It was something like 98% of white people or something like that do not have a single Black person in their life that they see or know intimately on a daily or weekly basis.
Yeah, 90-something% of white people don't have a single Black person that they see or know intimately on a weekly or daily basis. So I can arrange to be in the company of people of my race most of the time. For Black people in America, that's just not possible. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed or accused of stealing. I can turn on the television or open to the front page of the paper and see people of my race widely represented. When I am told about our national heritage or about civilization, I am shown that people of my skin color made it what it is. I can be sure that my children will be given curricular materials that testify to the existence of their race. There's this erasure of Black history in all of our education, really. Okay. I can go into a music shop and count on finding the music of my race represented. I can go into a supermarket and find the food that I grew up with, into a hairdresser shop and find someone who can deal with my hair. Whether I use checks, credit cards, or cash, I can count on my skin color not to work against my appearance of financial responsibility. I am not made acutely aware that my shape, bearing, or body odor will be taken as a reflection on my race. I can worry about racism without being seen as self-interested or self-seeking. I can take a job or enroll in a college with an affirmative action policy without having my coworkers or peers assume that I got it because of my race. I can be late to a meeting without having the lateness reflect on my race. I can choose public accommodation without fearing that people of my race cannot get in or will be mistreated. I am never asked to speak for all of the people of my racial group. I can be pretty sure that if I ask to talk with the person in charge, I will be facing a person of my own race. If a traffic cop pulls me over or if the IRS audits my tax return, I can be sure that I haven't been singled out because of my race. I can easily buy posters, magazines, postcards, picture books, greeting cards, dolls, toys, and children's books featuring people of my race. I can use blemish covering or bandages in flesh color and have them more or less match my skin. I can do well in a challenging situation without being called a credit to my race. I can walk into a classroom and know that I will not be the only member of my race. I can enroll in class at a college and be sure that the majority of my professors will be my race. So this is an abridged version. The original document by Peggy Mcintosh is like 75 examples of white privilege, but I'll put the link to this in the chat box in case anybody wants to refer to it later on. And we'll also have that as part of our resource guide that we send out after this call. Okay, and Melissa, yeah, you have your hand up.
When we were talking about white privilege, The Hate U Give, I don't know if y'all have read this. It's also in a movie now, but there's a lot of examples of exactly what you were saying, Brandy, about when you get pulled over, what to say. I mean, it pretty much sums it up pretty well, and so I just wanted to share that out.
A few of us here in a book club, that's what we're reading this month.
Oh, it's a great book.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll try to go through the rest of these definitions a little bit faster, but again, be sure to raise your hand if you want us to slow down and talk about anything or if you have any questions, okay? So internalization. a process through which we come to identify parts of our culture as parts of ourselves, especially in relation to norms and values. This is a crucial process in maintaining social systems because it leads people to regulate their own behavior in accordance with accepted norms rather than having to be monitored and corrected by external authorities. So it leads people to regulate their own behavior in accordance with accepted social norms rather than having to be monitored and corrected by external authorities. So that's the process of internalization. Agent or privileged identities. And actually this example is just coming to mind of white privilege or racism or discrimination, and it wants to be said. It's a little off topic, but so my boyfriend is a white person. His parents are white, and he has like really dark skin color. Not really dark, but for a white person, he has a really dark skin color. And so often people ask him if he's Muslim. And he was at the airport one time, and he was standing in line to check in at the airport, and there was this elderly woman in front of him who had a ton of luggage, so many bags. And every time the line would move forward, she'd have to take her bag and pull it, take her bag and pull it, take her bag and pull it. So he, noticing her doing this, went like, oh, let me help you. And he goes forward to pick up one of her bags and move it forward in line. And she goes, what are you doing? Don't you touch my luggage. What are you doing? Don't get near me. Get away from me. Get away from me. And he's like, oh, I was trying to help you. But it was like this crazy, fearful reaction, fearful response. And his mom was there with him, and she was like, yeah, well, I told you needed to shave, because when he's not shaved, he looks more Muslim, right? And so that's an example of like him having to shave in order for people not to be afraid of him when he's trying to just help them move their luggage forward. So I know some of you said the examples were helpful, so I thought I'd throw that one in there as well. Okay, so agent or privileged identities. So an agent identity is a social group that is positively valued and considered superior, independent, or normal. So the group that's considered the norm and have the access to resources and power. Internalized dominance is when members of the agent group accept their group's socially superior status as normal and deserved. So, and again, sometimes it's helpful for us to use analogies here. So an analogy of this would be like a man or somebody saying that like, well, yeah, men have always been presidents of the United States, but that's because men are more logical and they're more capable and they're more hardworking. So that's why they've always been president of the United States. That's an example of internalized dominance. It's believing these dominant narratives, believing these fictions, and then using that to justify your identity's superior status in society, feeling like it's deserved when really it's undeserved. Is that clear? So that's internalized dominance. And then internalized oppression is when people are targeted, discriminated against, or oppressed over a period of time, they believe and make part of their self-image. Their internal view of themselves, the myths and information that society communicates to them about their group. So they internalize the myths and misinformation that society communicates to them about their group. Internalized oppression can have very negative results: self-hatred, depression, confusion of identity, disconnection from one's own culture, etc. And a really good example of internalized dominance versus internalized oppression is the Stanford prison experiments. Are you all familiar with those? Okay, so I don't remember when this happened. It was many decades ago, but the Stanford prison experiments were a group of people were asked to participate in a study. They were not told what this study was going to be. So they took a randomized group of, I don't know, maybe 30 people. Mara, you might, if I'm saying anything wrong, correct me, because she probably knows the study better than I do. But so they took this group of about 30 people, and then they separated them into guards and inmates. So they literally just slapped a label on each person and said, okay, you're a guard, you're an inmate, you're a guard, you're an inmate, you're a guard, you're an inmate. And then kept them in this area for like, I don't know, days, weeks. How long was it? It was not a very, oh, were you gonna say something, Chris, or no? Okay. So anyways, they kept them in this space with each other for days or weeks. And what they found is that the people who had been labeled the guards, who had been labeled the wardens, started committing these atrocious acts of violence against the people that were labeled the inmates. And literally it was completely randomized, but these people didn't know that. They didn't know that it was randomized. So they assumed that they were given that label for a reason. They assumed that they were labeled the warden, they were labeled the person in power for a reason. So they started acting out that internalized dominance. And it's crazy, you should look it up. There's all this video footage of these wardens like beating the inmates, of them screaming at them, of them saying all this derogatory language towards them. And it's simply just because they were given different labels arbitrarily for no reason. And so that's an example of how we all just internalize dominance or oppression according to the label that our society gives us, according to the dominant narratives and violent ideologies of our society. Thank you, Serena and Melissa. Serena, thank you for putting that link in there if anybody wants to read more about that experiment. Okay. So also another example of internalized oppression is when a subordinate group starts to relate to themselves as inferior and use the tactics of the oppressor against themselves. So one of the ways that we see this is, as women, we often try to be one of the guys. Have you heard that phrase of like, oh, well, she's cool, she's like one of the guys. And that's us like denying our femininity and trying to make ourselves fit in with men because we've internalized the idea that men are superior. So we try to make ourselves be more like men so that we can get a little bit of the privilege that they experience in our society. The same thing goes for Black people in America who try to fit in with white culture and deny their Black culture so that they're seen as like a white Black person. So that's an example of internalized oppression, believing that my Blackness, I'm speaking as if I were a Black person, believing that my Blackness makes me inferior. So I'm going to deny it as much as possible. And I'm going to adopt the language and the culture of white society so that I can fit in with them more and hopefully gain some of the benefit of that. So that's an example of internalized oppression, and we could stop and give many more examples, but I'm trying to get through this all a little bit faster. But again, if anybody has a burning share that you want to share or an example, just go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, so those are all the terms, and then I just wanted to make clear that reverse racism doesn't exist. So I've been hearing a lot of people say about like, well, what about Black people discriminating against white people? Isn't that racism as well? And the reason why reverse racism doesn't exist is because Black people don't have institutionalized power. And in order for racism to exist, it has to be somebody whose identity has institutionalized power judging or discriminating against a group that does not have institutionalized power. So assumptions and stereotypes about white people are examples of racial prejudice, not racism. They're two very different things. Racial prejudice refers to a set of discriminatory or derogatory attitudes based on assumptions deriving from perceptions about race and or skin color. Thus, racial prejudice can indeed be directed at white people, like the example, white people don't dance. But it is not considered racism because of the systemic relationship of power. When backed with power, prejudice results in acts of discrimination and oppression against individuals or groups. So racism has to be a discriminatory act that is backed by institutionalized power. Does that make sense to everyone? So you all can go forth and explain to people that are like, well, what about reverse racism? You can explain to them how that doesn't exist. Yeah, okay, awesome. All right, so, how are we feeling? Should we stop and do a little meditation to recenter ourselves, or should we keep going with this conversation? I'd love to hear votes from y'all.
If you all would like, we can do a detox heart centering breath, if you'd like to try that. Okay. Okay, cool. Is that a yes? Okay, awesome, cool. So for this one, we're going to stick our tongue out. So we can bring our palms of our hands just open if you'd like, or you can connect your pointer finger into Gyan Mudra. This is your wisdom finger, and bring that down, whatever you'd like. And we're just bringing our hands down to our knees. And the breath that we're doing is we're opening up our mouth and sticking our tongue out and just breathing in and out of our mouth. Like you're panting like a dog. And this is a really detoxing breath. So you're going to feel right away, you're getting a lot of oxygen into your bloodstream, but it's also helping you detox out. So if you'd like to, you can also bring your hands to your heart if you want to focus the breath really wherever it wants to go to detox and to clear. And we're detoxing both on like a physiological level, like a chemical level, we're detoxing our body, but also our mental state and our thoughts. So if there are any stickiness held in our heart or up in our brain that we want to use this breath to move and to transform these thoughts and these grooves that we have, our breath here is going to help us do that. So we'll just do this for a minute, just so you can see how just a minute of this breath can help us shift the alchemy in our body and what can be cleared. So again, I'm just going to turn on some music because I find, I think you might have to make me the host. I'm sorry, B. I find that music really helps you move through, especially evocative music helps a lot. So I'm going to turn this on, and I can send you all this playlist in email too, so you can do this at home. Okay, so 1 minute, and our eyes are closed, bringing our focus to our internal state. Eyes are closed, hands either on your heart or down on your lap. Tongue is open, and let's breathe.
Be
nice,
aware
deep,
of
powerful
yourself
breaths.
as you are, without judgment. See what is. You have no further problem. The most important thing is self-remembering.
Keep going, halfway there. More seconds, stick with it.
Always at every moment be aware of what you're doing.
And deep breath in.
Watch yourself.
And hold. Feel your energy circulating throughout your entire system. Hold. Exhale.
You must be simply.
Again, breathe in. And hold your breath at the top. Hold this intensity, the vibration, hold. And exhale, release. And relax here. Eyes are closed, allowing your energy to settle. Seeing what's coming up for you, what's opening, what's releasing.
Yoga. You can be watchful.
Just noticing that when we detox, when we oxygenate, we can think more clearly. This is able to cleanse your body, boost oxygen levels, and improve your mental clarity. So if you're feeling into the chaos of all this information that you're taking on, if you're feeling as if you're taking on people's emotions, if you're very empathic, like a lot of us are, you can do this breath to clear space and come back to your center. This is very important when we're talking about showing up in these spaces. We want to show up fully present, calm and present, and fully in our heart center if we want to create the type of change that we're desiring in this world. So this breath work is helping us to release and to detox and to come back into a calm heart. So just see where your heart's at. See if you can find your sense of stillness, of presence. When we are in full presence, all of us arrives, ready to move into action from a place of calm stillness. We are fully available. And during this breath, if you felt uncomfortable at all, this is a very good practice, as we were talking about, to get us into the discomfort. So you feel like, wow, this breath is really uncomfortable, and you push through it anyways. And then at the end, you feel a sense of release. It's just like childbirth too. It's really intense to birth something new, and it's really painful and uncomfortable. And then once it arrives, you're fully present with this beautiful creation and manifestation that we can birth here. So using our breath to feel into the discomfort and the release, the contractions, the openness, the detox, and then the cleanse that you experience. So breath is really a really powerful tool at this time to utilize. So thank you, ladies, again for really going there and using this breath. Well done. Good job. Go back into the conversations. Thank you, B.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so what we're gonna do next is just go over some bullet points of what not to do, what is not helpful and what is not effective, and then what to do instead. And what I want for us all to be doing as we go through these bullet points is to really be looking for, how have I been being ineffective? So the lens through which we want to look, through which we want to have this conversation, is the perspective that I am 100% responsible for ending racism. Now, there's a big difference between responsibility and blame. When I choose the perspective that I'm 100% responsible for ending racism, then I have access to seeing how I can be more effective and how I can expand. What I'm not saying is I'm to blame or it's my fault. That is not what we're saying here. We're saying that when we choose the perspective that we're 100% responsible, then that's actually actionable. It's not actionable to point fingers and say, well, racism has existed for so long, it's completely out of my hands. What is actionable is to look from the perspective, I am response-able. I am able to respond to this. And what that gives us access to is we can see what hasn't been working. And how do we know that each of us has been doing something that's not working to end racism? Well, because it still exists, because it's still such a problem. It's such a huge, huge problem. And if I'm looking from the perspective that I'm 100% responsible for ending racism, and I see that racism is still such a problem, then obviously I personally must be doing something wrong. I personally must not be being as effective as I could be being. And this is the perspective that we all really need to take if we're going to move the needle on ending racism. It's just simply not helpful for us to focus our time and energy talking about everything that we have been doing right and everything that we have been doing to end racism. It's just helpful for us to look from the perspective of, okay, racism still exists, so clearly there's something that I'm doing that's not effective. So as we're going through these bullet points, the gold that we're digging for here is calling ourselves out for where we haven't been being effective, right? And if all of us, can you imagine if every single person in this country chose the perspective, I am 100% responsible for ending racism? Another thing that Jane Elliott says is we could end racism in, what does she say, 1 generation? Okay? It took us like 9 years from the time that we decided to go to the moon until we went to the moon. If we can figure out how to invent, hi Kat, welcome. Hey, thanks for joining us. We're about to get into the really good stuff. So you actually joined in perfect timing. Yeah. So if we can figure out how to invent a rocket ship and get ourselves from Earth, 140,000 miles away to the moon, then we can figure out how to end racism in 1 generation. So it is possible if we all are willing to choose the perspective that I am 100% responsible for ending racism, right? And every identity has a different responsibility. Right? White people have a certain set of responsibilities. Black people have a certain set of responsibilities. Every other identity that exists in this country has a certain set of responsibilities, and they all look different.
And it's just empowering for us to look from the perspective that we're 100% responsible. Because when we're thinking, well, I'm partially, can you imagine, right? How many people exist in America? How many millions of people live here? Yeah, does anybody know? All right, whatever, no, I don't want to even make up a number because I think it's going to be really wrong. Live in America, let's see. Okay, 320, oh, okay, thank you, Nikki. So 328 million people live in America. So if every single person is believing that I am 1/328 millionth responsible for ending racism, then none of us is doing anything. I mean, 1 out of 328 million is pretty darn close to 0% responsible. And that's the problem. So many of us relate to ourselves as if we're 1/328 millionth % responsible, and then we don't do anything. But when we look from the perspective that we're 100% responsible, then all of a sudden we see so much that we can do, and it becomes something that's actionable, that we can actually do something about. So again, the next portion of this conversation is we're going to be going over the things that are not helpful, that we should stop doing, and what we can do instead. And I want us each to look from the lens of, okay, how have I been being that's been ineffective? Because once we've identified that, once we know how we've been being that hasn't worked, then we can create a new way of being. And from that new way of being, we can look for new actions to take. Okay? All right, so the first thing not to do, as we've already talked a little bit about on this call, is to make it mean something about you when you have a racist thought or feeling. To judge ourselves and to believe that we're bad people because we have that thought or feeling. So rather than making it mean something about us when we have a racist thought or feeling, instead, we want to recognize that we all live in a society that is systemically racist. So of course we're going to have these thoughts, of course we're going to have these feelings, and we just want to not give those thoughts or feelings power or significance, and instead adopt the lens of curiosity, like, oh wow, how interesting that I just had a racist thought, or a sexist thought, or a ableist thought, or a whatever. Wow, I'm noticing that that arose in my awareness, and I'm willing to look at it and I'm willing to deal with it. When we're unwilling to own up to that we have these thoughts, then we can't actually deal with them. So witnessing the thought or emotion as an object of our awareness, being willing to own up to it, and then also remembering this isn't mine. This is the dominant narrative. This is the water that I'm swimming in. This is the fiction that I've been deluded into believing by my society, and my mind is just acting as an echo chamber for that right now. Okay, so that's the first thing not to do. Don't make it mean anything about you. Instead, really question the thought. Look at it as an object of our awareness and then question, is this true? This thought that I just had, is that really true? And say, okay, well, this isn't mine, and choose differently. That's the first thing. All right, so the second thing not to do is to say, well, I'm not responsible. I didn't personally enslave Black people. I didn't personally get on a ship from America and sail over to Africa and kidnap Black people from their homes and put them in cages and bring them across to sell them to be horribly abused and murdered and slaughtered by the millions. I didn't personally do that, so I'm not responsible. I didn't personally kill George Floyd. I didn't personally kill Breonna Taylor. So rather than saying, I'm not responsible, instead, let's say I'm response-able. I am able to respond to this. It's just not helpful for us to focus our attention on where we're not responsible. Instead, let's look at where we are able to respond and choose that perspective that I'm 100% responsible for racism continuing to exist in this society. And the fact that these racial acts of violence are still happening means that there's something that I'm not doing, right? Or there's a place where I'm being ineffective. Okay. So instead of saying, well, I'm not responsible, instead let's understand that it's not my fault as a white person that the machine is set up to benefit me. I did not personally set up the racist machine that way. But the machine is a reality, and I am a benefactor of the racist machine in this society. And because I'm a benefactor, I have the responsibility to do something about dismantling this machine that hurts people. So remembering that I'm 100% responsible isn't the truth. It's just a perspective that gives me power, that gives me access to new actions to take. And remembering that we are always response-able. We are always able to respond. And again, if anybody has a question or wants us to slow down, just raise your hand in the chat box. Serena says, I love that nuance. I think one of the hardest things for me has been making myself a bad person when a thought comes up that isn't in alignment with who I really think I am. Knowing that it came from somewhere, but also taking 100% responsibility for noticing the thought and doing something about it from a heart-centered place. Yeah, that's a beautiful synopsis. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, so really getting out of our fixed identity of believing that we're good people who would never participate in a system that oppresses people is one of the ways that we actually perpetuate racism, because we pretend that we don't participate in it. So the best thing that we can do is get over our ego identity that says, well, I'm a good person, I'm not racist, because that's just, it's not helpful, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. Okay, so another thing not to do is to make it about you. So an example of where I've made this about me is when all these protests started happening and when this all really came into the spotlight, I had several nights in a row where I really wasn't sleeping. And I was like doing so much research and listening to all these podcasts and watching the news and just obsessively thinking about what can I do, what can I do, what can I do? And then I noticed a couple times in conversations, I talked to people about like, I'm just so exhausted. I've just been thinking about this so much and I'm so tired and oh, it's been so overwhelming. And I'm like, wow, I just totally made this about me. I made racism about me. Wow, Brandy. Right? So that's an example of making it about us and talking about, oh, I'm just so overwhelmed and I feel so sad. And it's just taking attention away from the insidious nature of racism that needs to be talked about and addressed when we make it about us. So instead of making it about us, let's always be willing to look for what we can do better, seek to be called out, and know that that's where we grow. We grow when we're called out, right? And also what we can do better is be really responsible for our own self-care. Because again, one of the worst things that we could do is to fry our nervous system and get so burnt out. That's what happened to me. I went so deep into this issue and was watching videos about racism nonstop for days on end. And then I didn't want to talk about it at all anymore because I burned myself out. So that's just really ineffective. And I'm making myself as a white person the victim of racism, which is just hypocritical from my perspective. Okay? So really being responsible for continually sourcing ourselves and ensuring that we're not burning ourselves out so that we can be in this for the long haul. Yeah. Nikki says, yes, metaphysically speaking, the oppressive/abusive energies of our lineage, having never been dealt with, is passed on to us in the present. We're carrying that energy and it builds. It's up to us to hear our ancestral contribution to this energy that is still playing out. Yeah, absolutely. And it's just not helpful for us to say, well, I don't have internalized dominance. It's more helpful for us to say, well, of course, I come from a lineage that's been oppressing and colonizing and murdering and raping people for so long. Of course, it's up to me to take responsibility for that energy. Yeah. Okay. So another thing for us not to do that's not effective is to spiritually bypass. So there's these conversations in the spiritual transformational communities that I'm a part of where people say things like, well, that person attracted or manifested that experience of racism, and they just need to understand the law of attraction better so that they're not manifesting and attracting these experiences of racism. And again, that's very problematic and entirely unhelpful and a really dangerous way of thinking because it ignores the real reality of systemic institutionalized racism. So instead of spiritually bypassing, let's understand that nobody is personally responsible for their experience with racism. And individuals can only heal once our society has healed and dismantled racism. People are not islands unto themselves. If racism is still existing in our society, then it's my problem. right? It's our problem. It's something that we need to heal in the collective and dismantle in the collective. And it's not people who experience racism who need to raise their vibration. It's the people who are perpetuating racism that need to raise their vibration. So we want to be really careful where we use spiritually bypassing to exactly victim blame, right? And I'm just seeing a lot of that going on in like the spiritual transformational communities. So of course we want to use these tools of transformation, these tools of healing, and make them available to all walks of life, but let's do so in a way that isn't blaming the victim, and in a way that actually leaves space for us being able to talk about the reality of racism. Yeah. And again, if anybody has anything they want to share or jump in, I am by no means an expert on any of this. So I value all of your opinions and perspectives. If you want to jump in and share anything, just feel free to raise your hand. Okay. Okay, so another thing not to do is to believe that we need to do personal shadow work before doing work in the collective. So believing that like, well, I just need to heal myself and I need to heal my shadow before I'm really engaged and involved in healing racism in the collective. Again, that's a really dangerous mentality. And instead, we need to recognize that, and this is a quote by Cheryl Petty, we need to recognize that our ability to create meaningful change as an ecosystem depends on our ability to embody and reflect the transformation we wish to see inside of ourselves at the same time that we embody it in the systems around us. The relationship between inner and outer change is generative. The more we nurture and experience change in one, the more we long for and believe it can be so in the other. So not sacrificing outer work for inner work and not sacrificing inner work for outer work, but understanding that they're really two sides of the same coin. And we need to simultaneously be doing shadow work within our own being and shadow work in the collective at the same time, and not pretending that one of them is more important than the other. And I'll put that quote in the chat box in case anyone wants to reread it, because I really like that quote. Yeah. Okay, so another thing not to do is, and we've kind of already gone over this, but blaming ourselves. It's just not helpful for us to blame ourselves or to focus or dwell on the past where we haven't been doing as much as we would like to be doing. Instead, let's focus on, okay, but what can I do now? Let me get over that I haven't been participating as much as I would have liked to in the past. Let me let go of that. Let me allow my ego to sit in the naughty chair, and let me instead focus my attention on what I'm going to do and what actions I can take in the future. Okay, so something else not to do is don't not call out your white privilege because we're afraid it will undermine our credibility. And this goes back to the great example that you shared earlier, Serena. So often we're afraid that like, oh, well, if I speak about my own internalized dominance, or if I speak about my white privilege, or if I speak about the way that I have internalized these violent ideologies or these dominant narratives, if I speak about that, then I'm going to undermine my own credibility, and I'm going to get called out, and I'm going to look bad. And I don't want to do that. So I'm just not going to share about it. And again, that's another way that racism continues to exist, because nobody's willing to own up to where they are doing the racism, where they're perpetuating the racism themselves, even though we all do. Right? And then people of color are confused because they're like, okay, there's something going on here, because everywhere I go, I experience racism, but nobody in my life is willing to admit to perpetuating racism. So I'm very confused, right? So instead, we need to be willing to call ourselves out and also make sacrifices. Right? Sometimes it means that we're going to lose followers. I lost like 200 followers over the last week because of all the content that I've been sharing about racism. And that's completely fine. Like, whatever, I don't care. So being willing to lose followers, being willing to lose clients even. I mean, sometimes there's a financial aspect of this. Sometimes people won't want to work with us. And just being willing to make those sacrifices and sit with that discomfort, being willing to look bad, being willing to lose credibility. That's just part of the process, especially for me as a white person, as somebody who's benefited from the system of racism. I especially have to be willing to make these sacrifices. Okay. So another thing not to do is to talk about what we're doing behind the scenes. It cracked me up. Again, I keep referencing this video from Kellyanne Maddox, but she put it so perfectly. She's like, you know what's so interesting? All the people in my sphere keep talking about all this activism that they're doing in this place that I've never been to. I don't know where this place exists. I couldn't drop a pin on this place, but everybody's saying that all of their activism happens behind the scenes. Can somebody please explain to me what that means? Where is this behind the scenes place? What are you actually doing behind the scenes that nobody else can see? And I like the way that she pointed that out, because it's just not helpful to do things behind the scenes. Like, that's great if you're researching and educating yourself behind the scenes, but the work that we're doing behind the scenes should be so that we're prepared to do the work in front of the scenes where people can actually see, because that's the only way that this is actually going to change or transform. Like, if any of us have platforms of influence and we're talking about, like, don't you all worry, I'm doing plenty of anti-racism work behind the scenes. It's like, well, no, do it on your platform. Like, that's where you have your power. That's where you have your influence. So being willing to really do this work in every single sphere of influence that we're a part of, and being willing to ask to have this conversation in every group that we're a part of, even knowing that people might be annoyed that they have to have another conversation about racism, or knowing that we might be judged, still being willing to make those requests and really do this work publicly and in front of the scenes, but not to get kudos, not to get cookies, not to get praise, not to get attention, right? So instead of doing work behind the scenes, do it in front of the scenes. Instead of saying, I'm not racist, which, as we've talked about, is just really not effective, instead, let's recognize that one of the most common ways that we perpetuate systems of oppression is by pretending that we don't participate in them. One of the most insidious ways that systems of oppression remain unchecked is by advancing the myth that someone either doesn't discriminate, isn't racist, and is therefore a good person, or does discriminate, is racist, and is therefore a bad person. This sort of black and white thinking just doesn't create space for the nuance in which racism lives. And it makes it so that racism becomes invisible. It's not actually talked about, because everybody's like, what water? What water are you talking about? I don't live in water. I don't swim in water. Listen to this conspiracy theory over here where somebody's talking about we're swimming in water. Yeah. Okay, so the hard fact is we are inextricably a part of a country that has been deeply and grotesquely steeped in racism for more than 400 years. Our thought processes, beliefs, emotions, and understanding of the world around us has been shaped by this system of oppression. So it unavoidably echoes in each of our minds. We have been programmed to make assumptions based on race, and to deny this is to avoid owning up to our own internalization of systems of oppression. And that's a quote from an article that I wrote for Elephant Journal about white people stop saying I'm not racist. And that's another thing that we'll put in the resource guide that we email out to all of you afterwards. Okay, so we have a few more, but I'm desiring to hear from some of you about what have you gotten out of this so far. Specifically, are there things that you've realized, oh, you know what, I have been doing that, and now I'm seeing that there's a new possibility for me. There's a different way that I can show up. What are you getting out of this so far?
Sorry, I was gonna go upstairs and away from the Wiggles to say something. I like hearing all of this and just being part of the conversation, because sometimes I tend to think like, I'm super educated, I know all of these things, but you can know and hear all these definitions, and if you're not actively engaged in the conversation with all kinds of people about it all the time, you're just doing the behind the, quote unquote, behind the scenes stuff is the way that I took it, and not really being a part of the taking accountability for doing it for real, not just hiding behind this veil of, oh, I do all that stuff, or I know all of those things. And that was just kind of what was coming up for me or going through my mind as I was listening to everything that's going on and hearing all these definitions and looking through the document.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, and that's another important thing for all of us to identify. What is like the sea of judgment that we listen through when we're having conversations about race? So just being aware of what's coming up in your own mind. Like, I already know all this. Is that what's coming up? Is it like, well, I'm not that kind of white person that's coming up? Or is it like, oh, racism isn't that big of a deal? Like we're being dramatic, we're over exaggerating. Just witnessing what the sea of judgment is that we listen through when we're participating in these conversations about race. So Felix says, I think an important lesson I learned is that I know, or I think I know, that I'm not racist, but that's not enough to just know I'm not racist. Getting past the uncomfortable point and stopping people from perpetuating the stereotypes. Yeah, so it's not enough to not be racist. We have to be anti-racist. Yeah, exactly like what Serena said. So just whenever someone says I'm not racist, it's a deflection. It's just, I don't want to participate in this conversation. So I'm going to absolve myself from having to do the difficult work of really owning up to how I've inevitably internalized these dominant narratives of the society that I've grown up in.
I think there's this tendency to, when we see things come up, especially from older generations or like comedians who aren't Black, making racist jokes or racist comments, to just excuse it because, oh, they're like, it's social commentary. You know, they're bringing this up because it's not funny. And so it's, you know, it's sarcastic, but not really. I mean, there are still a lot of comedians that are racist and sound racist, and I don't think they should get a pass. And I find myself always calling out comedians who are sexist and being like, I don't think that's funny. But I don't do that when it's a sexist or when it's a racist joke, and I should more, especially also with like family members who I just say, oh, well, they're from a different time when they just thought about Black people a certain way, and that's not okay. They don't get a pass just because they're my family and because I see where they're coming from. They still should be called out.
Yeah, I noticed myself doing that, Serena, too, where when one side of my family makes racist commentary, and then I'll be like, that was so racist. I can't believe they just said that. And then people in my family will be like, yeah, but they grew up in Kansas. That's just what they know. And he's so old now. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. And that's just who he is. And just don't try to engage with him. It's not worth it. You're not going to change his mind at this point. If he's believed this for 75 years, he's not going to change his mind at this point. And then I find myself being like, yeah, you're right. It's probably not worth it. And it's like, okay, there I am perpetuating racism. Yeah.
I really love this share. Can you guys still hear me? I feel weird with the headphones. Yeah, okay. I love that share, Brandy, because I think there's such again, it's so nuanced. You know, like there's some people that just like probably won't ever change. And then there's others where like I look back on, I had an experience, this was like 2015, and I was in Utah, which is very white. Like there's not a lot of diversity there, and that's where I currently live. But at this time I was just visiting a friend, and I was at a party, and this guy who was very white and had a few Black friends, so therefore was like, I'm not racist. He was using the N-word the whole night at this party. And I, after about 20 minutes, just started yelling at him. I was like, how dare you use that word? Like, this is really uncomfortable. Like, I was just so angry, and I was just like, what are you doing? And then I left, and I was dating somebody at the time, and my boyfriend was just like, why are you making such a big deal about this? Like, everybody was like, he uses that word all the time. He's got Black friends. It's fine. And I remember being so livid. And what I'm realizing from that experience, and also through this conversation and everything I've been learning the last few weeks, that like, it probably would have been more helpful if I had just been like, hey, like, why do you feel the need to use that word? Like, do you know the history of that word? And like created a space to have a compassionate, understanding conversation where maybe I could have learned his perspective, but then also been like, and here's why that's fucked up, you know? And instead of being angry, or just instead of walking away, or instead of being like, oh, I guess that's just the way he is, but learning how to create a space, you know, that's not from a point of attacking someone, because a lot of people don't really realize what they're doing. And I honestly, also to be candid, when the riots first happened, I have an aversion to violence just in general. And so when the riots happened and I was in Salt Lake, people, this is great, people were like flipping cars, lighting them on fire, and then some guy showed up with a bow and arrow and was ready to like shoot people with a bow and arrow, and I was so confused, and I honestly, my first reaction was like, why do people need to be violent on both ends? Like, why does there need to be violence here? Is this just instigating more violence? Why can't there be people with megaphones? Just like, this was literally my experience of racism, and this is like the conversation I have to have with my child about the world, and like just sharing vulnerably. And then I was like, well, that also would never work. And then I had conversations with people who were like, well, there has to be violence because these voices aren't being heard, and so there needs to be the violent, you know, outrage in order for there to be change. And I really had to look at like how that first reaction of mine was racist or not anti-racist and uneducated. And so through that process, I had to kind of just sit with it and be like, okay, well, what can I do to support maybe not the violent aspect, although I know that's important, but how can I show up authentically? And I'm now working with women in Salt Lake City to create a platform for people of color to share their stories. And it's powerful because there's not a lot of people of color in Utah. And so their stories are really, I've been listening to just like bawling my eyes out, like, holy fucking shit, this is going on, you know? And I think, yeah, I just love that we're having this open dialogue because I still don't fully know what more I can do, and I have to check myself every day, like, why am I doing this, or why am I learning this, and how much am I willing to compromise my mental health, you know? Like you said, Brandy, like we still have to be nourished to show up. And so I just love that there are more spaces for these conversations, and I'm learning how to be more responsible and compassionate on both ends and speak up when there's something that's in front of me, and do it in a way that's not instigating more anger, but in a way that's like, well, why? You know, let's question that. Let's look at it. So thank you guys for creating this space.
Thanks so much for all of that, Allie. That was beautiful. Yeah, I had a similar reaction with all the protests and everything. And I'm like, we're not being the change we wish to see in the world, and we're fighting violence with violence, and we're fighting hatred with hatred. And it's just me, like, on my white person pedestal, just judging the way that Black people are advocating for themselves and their rights. And I watched a video that I thought this guy explained it really well. He was talking about, like, all y'all white people talking about how we should be doing peaceful protests. Like, have you been paying attention to history? Have you seen how many times we've tried that? And he's just naming off, like, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about, I wish I could name them all, but just all these instances in history where they've tried peaceful protests and it's gotten them nowhere. And he was like, let me use an analogy to explain this to you. He's like, imagine if I'm on a little bike lane and I'm coming down a hill and there's somebody up in front of me on a bike and I'm going way faster than that person. And I'm from the top of the hill, I see that this person's there. So I shout to them, on your left. And they have their headphones in so they don't hear me. And I'm getting closer and closer. On your left, on your left, on your left, on your left, on your left. And the person isn't paying attention or isn't listening. So then a collision happens. And he's like, that's what we're seeing. We have been shouting, we're oppressed, we're oppressed, we're oppressed, we're oppressed, we're oppressed, we're oppressed for hundreds of years, and all y'all haven't been listening. So now it's time for us to take radical action because nothing else has worked. And trust us, we've tried and it hasn't worked. And for me, that really put it into perspective. And I'm like, yeah, who am I to be like policing how you all should be, how we all should be working towards ending racism? Like, you're right. The extent to which racism is so radical in our society, like, is the extent to which we need to take radical action to combat it. We can't combat something as radical as racism with like very peaceful, silent, quiet protests. And I have hope for ways where we can use peaceful action to help create change. And unfortunately, this is what it's come to. They've been shouting on your left for hundreds of years, and we haven't adjusted our course of action accordingly. So this is what ends up happening. Yeah.
Another thing that I think is really important to speak to is that people are really enraged by all of the looting and the rioting and its effects on property. And yet that same sentiment doesn't extend to the literal lives of people being slaughtered. And that incongruency is a really easy thing to point out when someone is making that argument. Like, why does it matter to you that properties are being burned and not people's lives? So I think when I spoke to my own mother about this, and she's like, oh, but why are they doing it like that? I was like, Mom, like, who cares? Like, forget that. Think about the people that are being murdered for the simple reason of being Black. And I think that really put it into perspective for her. And she said, you are right. Yeah. So just my thoughts there.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, so many people are up in arms about the property damage, and those same people have not been concerned about the fact that thousands of Black people are murdered by police every year. Like, okay, let's take a look at our priorities here. I don't know if you all heard about the Black man that was murdered on Friday night at the Wendy's. You heard about that? So he was in a Wendy's drive-thru and he fell asleep in line to get his food or whatever. And the police were called because he was like in this drive-thru line and his car wasn't moving, and they had him get out of his car and do a sobriety test, and he was inebriated, and then they were like trying to, I guess, put him in handcuffs, and he takes the police officer's stun gun. It wasn't a real gun, but he takes the stun gun and starts trying to run away, and they shot and killed him. And it's like, okay, so a stun gun, this possession, is more important to this police officer than the life of this Black man. And that just kind of goes to show our priorities in this country and how much we've objectified and dehumanized Black people, and how we've used dominant narratives to objectify and dehumanize them so that they're worth so little in the minds of many white people that something like a stun gun is worth more to them. Yeah. Melissa, I know you've had your hand up for a long time. Sorry. I'd love to hear.
It's okay. I've been listening to everything, and everything that's been said has been bringing up more for me, I think. I'll just start off with what really resonated with me when you were going through the how have I been ineffective, is when you said we come from a lineage of oppression and it's been passed on to us. I think that's so true. And like, I was just on the phone with my mom earlier, and she was telling me about, like, how our grandfather or her father is, has different beliefs than me and her. And she's like, well, that's how it was, back then. So, like he gets that pass, like Serena was saying. And that was very uncomfortable for me to just kind of like let that go. Like, oh, okay, that's just how it was. And then with the N-word, someone was talking about their white friends saying that. And I remember the first time I started teaching in a 80% Black school and hearing the N-word, but it was with the A on the end, not the ER. So it was like, and I saw Black students saying it to other Black students, and then students who weren't Black but identified culturally as Black saying it. And that just really threw me off, and I felt really uncomfortable. But after being there for like 3 or 4 years, I started to just it was normal to hear the N-word all the time. Like, then they would say it like, as in like a friend, amigo, like, I'm not gonna say it, but with the A on the end, of course. And then my ear just got used to it, and it felt less uncomfortable to hear it around me all the time. Like, I'd hear it in the hallways, I'd hear it in the class. Like, they didn't get in trouble when they said it because the context of it was different. So I thought I'd just touch on that and how interesting that was for me to experience.
Yeah, and it's tough when it's so normalized and it's so omnipresent, it's so everywhere. It's really easy to be like, what am I going to do about this? Everybody's saying it, everybody's doing it. Like, what could I possibly do? And again, that's a dangerous way of thinking, because when all of us are thinking that way, when all of us are like, well, there's nothing that I can do to stop this because it's so omnipresent, then none of us do anything and it keeps continuing. Yeah. And obviously, I think we all know this, but obviously it's very different for Black people to say the N-word to each other versus a white person saying it, because history. I don't really think anything more needs to be said about that. I feel like it should be pretty obvious why it's a different scenario. Black people have reclaimed the word for themselves and themselves only. It's not okay for anybody else to be using that word. Yeah. Any other shares?
takeaways from what's been said so far?
I have something empowering just to maybe leave somebody with before we like do more closing, but a boss at my company recommended a really cool book that's called The Fourth Turning. Has anyone heard about this? So there's this concept called the fourth turning, which I guess is the time between one cultural climax or crisis to the next. And it usually is between 80 and 100 years or so. So like the time from the Protestant Reformation to the Armada crisis, or like the Puritan Awakening to the Glorious Revolution. These are just like from even back in like the 14th century that things like this have been documented. And we're actually at the time right now of a fourth turning, which is that climax. So we're at an 80-year mark right now where our generation, this millennial generation, is going to be responsible for the next big like revolution. So I just thought that was really cool.
I love that. I feel that it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's exciting. It is that this conversation is in the collective in such a big way. Yeah. Shannon, did you want to share something?
Yeah, you noticed very well. Thanks. Yeah, that's funny, Serena. Thank you for mentioning that, because just before you mentioned it, I was thinking like, I wonder why it's happening now. I'm so glad that it is, but like, why is it happening now? So that's interesting that you would bring up that book. And I feel like too, like Nikki mentioned earlier, that we are like the conscious men of the Me Too movement. I was so glad that that movement happened and is happening, and now this movement, I mean, I know this movement has been happening for a while, but it feels like it's got more energy behind it now. So I'm just grateful. I tend to think that consciousness is rising, and this just feels like a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable work, right? This whole waking up process is not rainbows and butterflies. It's like really sitting with discomfort and being willing to call ourselves out and own up to how we have personally perpetuated these systems of oppression. All right, so back to things that we can stop doing and things that we can do better. So another dangerous belief that gets in our way of being effective activists is thinking, I don't have a big enough platform. This is other people's jobs. This is people's jobs who actually have influence. I don't have influence enough to make a difference, so I'm just not going to do anything. So recognizing how dangerous that mentality is, right? And when we are willing to take 100% responsibility, then we see that our own home is our platform. Our everyday life is our platform. Every conversation that we have is our platform. We don't need to have X number of followers or students or whatever in order to have a platform. Every single one of us has a platform. And if we all utilize it, then we'll really see real change happening. Okay, so another thing not to do is listening to prove something. So if there's a person of color sharing about their experience, not listening to prove that, well, I also have been oppressed. I also have experienced discrimination. And also not listening to try to figure out how we can, again, establish our anti-racist credentials, establish what a great social justice ally we are. Not listening with any agenda or intent to prove anything, simply listening to get that person's world, to really get what they're saying, really get what they're sharing, so that we can get a glimpse into their world. So letting go of any agenda or any lens that we're listening through, and listen just to listen. Yeah, listen humbly and learn to let the ego sit in the naughty chair. Okay, so something else not to do is, again, to try to establish our anti-racist credentials. Instead, let's always focus the conversation on what we can do better. So assuming that we're part of the problem, just assuming that always and forever, no matter how much work we've done, no matter how many books we've read, how many podcasts we've listened to, how many conversations we've had, never assuming that we are beyond this, always assuming that we're part of the problem.
not from a place of guilting ourselves, not from a place of blaming ourselves, which is inherently disempowering and takes us out of the game, gets us off the court, but from a place of constantly being curious about what can I do better? The fact that racism still exists means that I'm part of the problem, so what can I do better? And I'm letting go of the need to prove to anybody how not racist I am. I don't need anybody to know that about me. I'm just gonna keep living from a heart-centered place, and I'm gonna keep being curious about what I can do better, and be humble and be patient. Yeah. Okay, so, and a lot of this is stuff we've already covered, but so what not to do is not do anti-racist work with an agenda wanting to get validation. I can't remember if I shared this on this call yet, but I noticed when all of this was coming to light, I did this whole post that I spent a lot of time with the wording about anti-racism, and I posted it, and then I keep checking my Instagram, like, ooh, how many people have liked it? How many people have commented on it? And I'm like, oh my gosh, did I seriously just post about anti-racism so that I could get kudos, so that I could make myself look good and get a bunch of likes? Or did I post about anti-racism because it's the right thing to do? So just continually checking ourselves and continually calling ourselves out for where we're trying to make it about us, where we're trying to center ourselves, where we're trying to distract from the most important conversation at hand. I love this. So again, this is from Kellyanne Maddox from that video that I recommend for you all. So she says, I do anti-racist work because it's my loyalty to myself. It is my loyalty to who I think I am. I'm not doing anti-racist work to get validation from anybody else. It's because of my loyalty to myself and because of who I claim to be as a person. And she says, my commitment is never to slink away because I can. So for those of us who have any form of privilege, if we have race privilege, if we have gender privilege, if we have class privilege, if we have education privilege, if we have language privilege, the privilege of knowing how to speak English in a predominantly English-speaking society, if we have any form of privilege, it's important that we have the commitment to not slink away just because we can. Because when we're in the privileged perspective, we have the privilege of not having to talk about this. We could easily avoid having to have these difficult conversations. We could easily avoid having to call ourselves out for our own privilege. So adopting the personal motto, the personal mantra of, I give up the right to slink away just because I can. I'm committing to not slinking away because I can. Okay. Okay, so another thing not to do, another thing to avoid doing is avoid inaction or avoid not doing something because of fear of getting it wrong or looking bad. So again, this is like the example of the double dutch, the 2 jump ropes going at once. If we're afraid of getting hit by the rope, then we're never going to jump in. So we're always going to stay on the outside. We're always going to stay on the sidelines. So we have to be willing to have the rope hit us several times as we try to really jump in to this conversation, to this work of anti-racism in a meaningful way. So instead of being afraid of getting it wrong, being afraid of looking bad, being afraid of being called out, instead, let's really yearn for that. Let's yearn for people to critique us and criticize us. That's the only way that we're ever going to get better. That's the only way we're ever going to be better anti-racists. So putting ourselves in spaces where we're going to feel uncomfortable and knowing that that discomfort is our growth, that discomfort is our expansion, right? So really being willing to be wrong, being willing to look stupid, being willing to look bad, and being willing to have our identity as being a good person be threatened. So being willing to break out of that identity. Okay. So another thing not to do, as we've already talked about, is don't get burned out and fried. Instead, use these tools, like the exercises that Chris has been giving us, use these tools to expand and strengthen your nervous system so that you can actually be in this for the long haul, so that you can be consistent, right? This is a lifelong commitment to do the work of anti-racism and to constantly challenge all of the places where racism hides. And it requires for us to have longevity and sustainability, which requires us to be able to source ourselves and expand our nervous system so that we can hold this intensity more. Okay. So that's all I have in terms of what not to do and what we can do better. So I'd love for each of us to go around and say something that we notice that we've been doing that hasn't been as effective as it could be. So what's a way of being that we've been being that's just really not in service of the goal of ending racism? So is it being afraid? Is it being unwilling? Is it being insecure? Is it being like pretending ourselves to be evolved beyond racism, absolving ourselves from being part of the problem? Is it that we've been making it about us, wanting to center the conversation around how much this has personally impacted us? Is it that we've been being ashamed and guilting ourselves for what we haven't been doing in the past, rather than focusing on what we can be doing? Is it that we've been being judgmental and accusatory and therefore not participating in these conversations? So whoever has something that they've identified. Oh, Nikki, yeah, go ahead.
I'm so in love with this whole thing that you put together. I just, from every nook and cranny, everybody participating, I'm just so immensely grateful, and I have to bounce off, but I didn't want to leave without mentioning that through the course of this time together, I'm really even more acutely aware of how blind I am. I have so many blind spots to the system. I mean, you know it exists because of the statistics of, you know, the inequality and like all, so I know it's there, but my own intimate existence, I don't feel like I've ever seen it in real time where I've been chosen over a person of color. And I want to see that because it's here. So I'm just not seeing it. And so I'm just really excited to peel those layers away. I can feel my vibe. I can feel things happening like big time right now. And I'm so excited for, I know all of us are transforming in so many ways. So I'm excited to listen to this again, this recording, once you send it, and continue to explore, because I know, yeah, I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole, but that's my experience. Is I'm excited to see my own blind spots so that I can start to embody more of the answers and speak more from that place of being on both sides, you know. So grateful. Thank you both, Chris and Brandy and everybody. I love you, and I look forward to the recording and watching this major revolution happen.
Thanks so much for being here, Nikki. Yeah, awesome. And we'll send a resource guide, all sorts of different resources for how we can make the water visible to ourselves. See the color red when we've been in a red room for forever, to make the invisible visible. Yeah, right. Awesome. Thank you, Nikki. So good to see you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
I've been really scared. Yeah, really scared of doing it wrong and feeling paralyzed, like having an urge to try this way and then second guessing, like, no, I shouldn't say that, I shouldn't do that. That's not going to be received well. So I like the invitation to sit in the discomfort and let the ego sit in the naughty chair, and the I forget what else, but yeah, that invite critique, and because that's how we grow, and that's how you know you're doing something. If you feel like, okay, I messed up, I'm in trouble, like, okay, well, that's not bad, that's good, that means you're doing something.
Yeah, I love that. Awesome. Yeah, so being unafraid to be wrong, that's such a huge one. Thank you. Who else?
One way that I think that I have been being is that I think sometimes it can be easy for me to tell myself, oh, I'm a person of color, I'm not racist, but that's not true. I grew up in America, and I grew up with this insidious dominant narrative, and I also have the self-work to do, and I also have to see the ways that I perpetuate racism against Black people too. And I think that really sitting with that and knowing that and being honest about it is a really important step for me personally in the right direction.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah, and like I said before, people of color have a little bit different work to do, but we all, it's actually like a service that we can do for ourselves to take the perspective that I'm 100% responsible. Because when I believe that other people are responsible, then I feel so helpless. I feel so powerless. I feel so disempowered. So yeah, almost giving yourself that gift of choosing that perspective of, I too am 100% responsible. That's awesome. Thanks, Burnett.
I'd love to share a quote from Ram Dass that I've been using as a mantra lately. And he said, I would like for my life to be a statement of love and compassion. And where it isn't, that's where my work lies. And so I've been looking into those spaces too. And also being somewhat white passing sometimes, but also a person of color. My dad is a brown immigrant man. And my one brother looks very white and my other brother looks very brown, and they've had very different experiences in their life. And we together as a family talk about it because my mom is very white, my dad's very brown. She's seen things that have happened. People say really weird things to my dad, like all of you immigrants always steal our white women, like weird stuff like that he's gotten. And my brother Mike has faced like people want to fight him all the time, but my brother Greg has never experienced that, being a more white passing person. So it's been really interesting to have these conversations with my family and to go deeper and to really see where the work lies for us to create more compassion and love in this world. So thank you all for having such beautiful, deep discussions. This has been so lovely to be a part of.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Chris. And I love that Ram Dass quote. Oh my gosh, so good.
I'll go. I find myself doing the very unhelpful thing of making this about me and being like a white martyr for the cause and being like, I'm going to show up at a protest and use my white body to, stand in solidarity and protect Black people. Like, no, this isn't my movement. I can be as supportive as possible, but I really need to step back and let others lead and not disempower myself in any way, but only share when it's appropriate and only help when it's really helpful and not make it about me. And I also find myself doing what Shannon's doing of, is this, should I post on my Instagram? Should I call people out? Should I do this and that? And just not taking any action out of fear of doing it wrong. And that's like the least helpful thing that it can be done, is just doing nothing. So I'm really glad that you and Chris decided to put this together, and so glad that it at least feels like being part of the shift has made me feel like I'm doing something, but still not really. This feels like such a small step, and I'm just like trying to look at other ways that I can do more while not making it about me in any way, and not even like making it known, although I don't want it to be like behind the scenes work either. I just finding that balance of like wanting to do things not for credit, but also making it clear that I am in support. So yeah, just like constantly finding that balance and not being afraid of getting hit with the jump rope while I'm doing it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because another thing I want to clarify here is that we should never not take an anti-racist action because we're afraid that people are going to think that we're only doing it to get credit. Okay, so yes, by posting about anti-racism, by talking about it, there might be people that are like, well, she's only doing that in order to get kudos, to get a pat on the back, to get credit. And that's okay if people think that. Still do it anyways. Let people think that about you, right? And so that balance between giving other people the space, giving marginalized identities the space to share, and us sharing,
the whole thing about don't make it about you doesn't mean don't share. It means share every single day of your life in every single space possible, always, but have your share be with the intention of educating people about racism and supporting people in dismantling racism, rather than having the share be about like, I'm just so sad and I've been crying all day because I'm so sad about George Floyd or whatever. That's like making it about you. And then people of color tend to feel like they need to comfort us. Like, oh, it's okay, you don't need to feel bad. And then they're having to do the emotional labor of comforting us. So that's the difference between like being silent and making it about us, right? So we don't want to be silent. We want to share as much as possible in every space possible. And when we share, we want to make sure that we're not making it about ourselves. So it's not don't say things if you're a white person, it's say things all the time. Just don't center yourself, make it about you and turn the attention to you, and then like need support, emotional support from other people, which is just like draining resources from the collective. Is that clear? Because I know it's confusing. I know it's confusing for people. Okay. Yeah. Mara says, I needed this encouragement not to be so afraid of doing it wrong while tactfully and powerfully navigating doing things in a way that doesn't hurt the movement or any Black people. Yeah. And it just requires us getting it wrong a lot of times in that process. Yeah. Okay. Who else wants to share?
I can share. I love what you were just saying too, with like, you know, not wanting to do it wrong or like not wanting to make it about you. And what I really find valuable in white people when they're sharing right now is like sharing really, like you said, Brand, like important resources, like put it on your story, post it, like ways that people can get connected and get educated, but also sharing like, oh, this is like what I've now learned, you know, like people who are like, whoa, like I thought that like all lives mattering was like what I wanted to do, and now I'm realizing why that's like not helpful, and like this is what I've now learned, because then it encourages other white people to be vulnerable and say like, oh yeah, like I actually am being racist, or I'm not being anti-racist. And so like being vulnerable on social media, I feel like I really value when white people talk about the ways in which they are stepping up and like what they're accountable to, because I think it opens a larger conversation around kind of what you're talking about today, Brandy and Chris, like letting go of shame, letting go of it being about you, but like let it be about learning. Like what have you learned and how are you doing it differently? And then of course sharing resources and, you know, important stuff. So I love that. And then one of my biggest takeaways from today is just like how important it is to have these conversations with more people more often. Because it's so easy to just get in my phone and look at all the things and be like, cool, I did my work for the day, and then just like get on with my life. But to be able to actively have conversations with other people I don't know, like I've never met a lot of you, and that's wonderful. To be able to just kind of share and open the dialogue is really quite a special thing. So I'm really grateful for this space. And I do have to hop off too, but thank you all so much.
Thanks, Allie, for being here. Thank you so much. Okay, and Felix, I think you want to share?
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to say is that, you know, I've had my own experiences with racism and stuff like that throughout my life. And it's actually pretty difficult for me to not make it about myself. And I realize that that's important, you know, especially right now. It's not about, you know, my people or anything like that. We're trying to stand up to a specific issue, even though all racism is bad. But so it's tough for me not to get emotional in these types of situations. And then I argue, and then I end up just preaching at somebody instead of, you know, making them understand my point. I just kind of yell at them. And I think that that's a really bad way to get your point across. And it's a really good way for somebody to just shut down. And at that point, you lost the argument, even if you're right, you know. So one of the things that I'm trying to get better at is just seeing things from a different perspective than my own and the experiences that I've had.
Yeah, awesome. And that's one of the biggest challenges to all this work, right? Getting outside of our own perspectives enough to really get someone else's world. And that's kind of what we were talking about, of being aware of the sea of judgment that we typically listen through. And I've noticed this too, Felix, in some of these conversations. I'm like, well, what about the oppression that I've experienced as a woman? And it's like, okay, and that's not what we're talking about right now. So it's not helpful for me to bring that into the space, because right now we're having a conversation about the oppression that Black people experience in this society, not what women experience in this society. So just like knowing the time and place for it. So yeah, that was a beautiful share. Thank you, Felix.
Kat, would you like to share?
Yeah, sorry, it's been a crazy day. I'm running around because we're reopening our gyms tomorrow. To be honest, I like listening to everyone, you know. I'm really much an observer. I like to kind of take in what everyone, I like to learn different perspectives of viewing things. I really do. I don't ever think it's ever bad, even when you hear the ugly, because the ugly has to come out. And to be honest, that's how I feel about everything that's going on. I feel collectively all the ugly stuff needs to come out for the big changes to come. So I'm doing my work on myself, because where I wasn't doing my part is I wouldn't speak up. Yeah, I felt a lot of oppression as a woman, and being Mexicana, I've suffered, I've dealt with racism. So it's something that I never really spoke of, because when I tried, well, you're just the cute girl trying to have something to say. So now I'm just like, okay. So my whole thing is like, I'm doing my best to listen, to educate myself. And when asked, I will, state my opinion. And that's it. Like, just pretty much, like I said, I'm very open-minded. I really do appreciate the different perspectives. And I just hope as long as we could keep having an open dialogue and not judge each other for that, because everybody has their own path, everything that led them to who they are and why they believe what they believe, and just being open-minded to changing our perspectives. And that's all I can really say about it,
Yeah, beautiful. And do you have a commitment for moving forward for how you want to show up to further this movement?
Yeah, just like I said, I think right now it's kind of being mindful, because growing up being Mexicana, I always tripped out that even a lot of Mexicans were racist towards Black people, and like that. I'll be honest, to me, racism never made, like, it always kind of like baffled me, because I didn't understand how you could hate somebody based on their skin color. So when it was, when I dealt with it, it was just like, whoa, like, this shit really exists. So now my whole thing is I'm really doing my best to take as much, like, constructive content in, like, stuff that I could really build on, so that way when I do voice my opinion or my perspective, I do so not just like talking out of my ass, like that's the truth. Like, and I think that's all I could really say, because I'm still learning how to step up and speak up for myself, because that's always been my biggest problem, is my own confidence. So I'm working on my confidence so that way I can build my platform. And also, like I said, just being respectful to others. So when I do speak from my platform, I could, hopefully people will respect me as much as I respect them, whether or not we agree on the same subjects.
Yeah, awesome. I love that. So really doing the work of educating yourself and working on building up your own confidence so that you can speak about these things, and creating a platform so that you have more influence, and also not waiting until you have a bigger platform until you start giving yourself permission to speak up. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Kat. I know you have a really busy day today, so thanks for joining us for a bit here. Okay. And Melissa, you said not being afraid to jump into the double dutch. I've been overwhelmed by all the sides to this movement. It's been mentally taking a toll, and I'm so happy and feel rejuvenated from this opportunity. Awesome. I'm so glad. Is there anything else you wanted to share, or did that sum it up for you?
Yeah, it's just what I mean by all sides is, seeing people who I've befriended and see their opinions out there that are like, oh, well, that was different. All the different sides, the Confederacy, statues and flags, the defund the police, the looting, all those different things that are happening, all the facets of this. And this has been really, really nice. It's been rejuvenating. It's kind of reset some things for me. So I'm just very thankful for that.
I'm so glad. Well, thanks everyone for your willingness to show up and participate in this conversation that's been longer than 3 hours now. So does anybody have any questions about anything that we talked about today, or anything that we want to try to clarify before we move into our closing meditation? Okay, awesome. Well, I will turn it over to Chris then for our closing meditation.
Beautiful. I really love this meditation. It brings us into our heart center, but propels us into action from our heart. So this one's really good to do if you're ever upset or confronted. You just take yourself out of that situation and just take 1 to 3 minutes to drop into this space. And then after you complete it, move fully forward with your heart. So what we're going to do is take our left hand and put it onto our heart center. And we take our right hand and connect our wisdom finger into our thumb, so into Gyan Mudra, and we hold it out as if you're giving an oath. And so this is propelling us into motion, and this is calming us and connecting us to our heart center. Our left hand is also connected to our feminine, and our right hand is our masculine. So kind of centering into the feminine and moving forward in action into that masculine state. And what we do here is we breathe in, and we hold the breath and pull it up to where our hand is, up to our chest. So intentionally holding it up as long as you can, and then exhaling it out completely and holding it out. And inhaling, pulling our breath up to our heart center and holding there for as long as feels good. So there's no struggle here at all. And then exhaling when we're ready and releasing it out and holding it out for as long as feels good. So just finding a rhythm. There's no strain here. We're just calming down our nervous system. And this mudra is really powerful. So we'll just be here for 1 minute just to really feel the effects of it. And again, I'll just put on some meditative music so we can drop in. So eyes are closed, looking upward and inward, and begin that breath pattern. So breathing in, holding, pulling the breath up to the top of our chest. And whenever you feel ready to exhale the breath, exhale fully and hold it out until you're ready to take your breath again. Just 20 more seconds here, just noticing if you're feeling any strain in your breath and holding it or releasing it, making this as gentle and as comfortable as possible. We're tuning into our parasympathetic nervous system, calming us down, coming into our heart center, but also knowing how to move forward, how to create from that action space in the most heart-centered way. And a nice deep inhale. And hold your breath at the top. Suspend your breath here. Pull it up into your heart. Hold. And exhale out fully. You can bring your hand down to your lap and relax here with your eyes closed. Feeling into this calmness, this centeredness, this presence. And deciding now how you want to move forward from this heart-centered space. Everything is able to transform when we align our gifts and our skills and our resources to the pursuit of a greater purpose. So what is this greater purpose for you? Be it your land, inviting people to your space, opening up conversations, maybe through your artwork, through your writing, through your platform, maybe it's donating. What are your skills and how can they be helpful right now? What privileges do you have that you can redistribute to the movement of this Black liberation? What feels empowering to you, and the gifts you want to give, these juicy gifts moving forward. Again, our breath is our prana, is our life force. So we're going to breathe in 3 times, bringing this life force into this intention that we have in our bodies, in our hearts, in our soul. A nice deep breath in, igniting it with life force. Exhale out, releasing expectations. Inhaling in, giving ourselves life energy. Exhaling out anything we want to release. Inhaling in love, support, pure prana. Exhaling out completely and fully. Beautiful. And slowly coming back into your body, you can open your eyes softly into the space. We so appreciate you all so much for arriving so fully and so presently, really being in these conversations, going deep. And Brandy, thank you, my partner in all of this, for distinguishing all of these mental, all these definitions, all of these deeper things, and really just making so much sense of how we can move forward with new perspectives and being able to share this information. It's so wonderful. And this type of these conversations and this embodiment work really go hand in hand. So making this, like we're saying, this is part of our spiritual practice. All life is sacred. Like everything is sacred. Every conversation we have, this is our spiritual practice, and this is a part of what we get to do in this lifetime. We're here, physical and present in this lifetime for a reason, and so it's time for us to step up and really be fully ourselves and share that. And in the discomfort, in the expansion, like we're here to support one another in this community, in these connections that we have. So we really invite you to reach out to us. A lot might surface in the next few days, especially if you're working with this embodiment work. We really encourage you to keep going with it. We'll be sending you out an email with resources and guides, with these playlists. And if you need any additional support, like we are here for that. And we want to hold more of these discussions and conversations. So we'd also love to know what you'd like to hear more of. If there's things that we didn't hit on today that you'd like in the next discussion, because this is an ongoing dialogue that we're going to continue to have. So we'd love your feedback and so appreciate all of you so much. And I'll turn it over to Brandy for final closings. Thank you, ladies.
Yeah, thank you all so much again. And thank you for your donations. We're going to send those directly to Black Lives Matter. I think we raised about $250, which isn't much, but it's something for the cause. So every little bit helps. So thank you all for your donations and your time and your willingness. And so you can donate on Venmo at Brandy-Tebow. And again, 100% of everything you send, we're going to send to Black Lives Matter organizations. Or if you don't have Venmo, just let me know and I'll send you our PayPal, or we can find another way. And yeah, as Chris said, we are making ourselves available for any additional inquiries or conversations, or if you have something come up for you that you're confused about, an idea you want to bounce off of us, if you want to post something but you want to run it by somebody before you post it, we're resources for you and are making ourselves available to continue this dialogue and support in whatever way we can. And we'll send you all the recording. So if there's anybody in your life that you feel would benefit from watching this workshop, you can feel free to send it along to them as well. Thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful day. Keep doing the good work. Keep being Jedi masters of justice, equality, diversity, and inclusion.
Thank you for hosting this, both of you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. This is amazing. Thank you. Gratitude.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Thank you.
Bye.
I look forward to the next time.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. Bye, everybody.
Bye.